Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Introverted in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 31, the fourth is the climax to the end. Shimura Danzo watched dispassionately the match going on. He had frowned at the sight of Naruto not delivering the finishing blow to the Iwagaku Kunoichi, but maybe his command had been a bit lax. He had told the boy to show no mercy and to be the weapon of Konoha. Maybe he should have added to kill all his opponents, rather than ruthlessly show them his strength. Still, maybe he believed he could better serve Konoha without starting a war. He had hoped his little speech on leaving no quarters would have worked, but there was still time. He watched with ill-concealed amusement as the flute-using Genjutsu Kunoichi of Otagaku were lost after the second blow from Meitogai's disciple. He smirked as he looked at the crowd's murmurs. As long as the civilians hated Naruto but the shinobi did not, he'd have to go between his fellows in arms to find solace. It would subtly develop him into a more militaristic mindset, even without his full-out intervention. His face schooled itself back to stone, however, the moment he watched a few Umbu appear in the same booth as the Hokage and murmur to him something, which then made Hiruzen's eyes narrow on him. He feigned ignorance, even as he realized the Sandaime had called for 5 minutes of pause before the start of the next match. It didn't take him much to stand up and disappear from his corner, only to casually cross with the Hokage near the bathrooms. The Umbu that surrounded them just seemed to decide to go elsewhere, leaving the two old friends to stare at one another. "I don't know what game you are playing, Danzo," Hiruzen hissed. "But it ends now, understood?" "You will have to be more specific, Hiruzen." "It was well done, I admit it, but the corpses were dead before the claw and bite marks settled in, and the girl's body had a mild exciter in her bloodstream. So, care to tell me why you thought harmfully setting back one of Naruto's teammates would benefit Konoha? I am ignorant of such a ploy. And I am not an imbecile." The hiss came out extremely heated, especially when Hiruzen's right hand shot up in a curled fist, making Danzo's back hair rise slightly. "I know this is your work. These power shows of Naruto? You told him to act like that. Don't think I haven't understood it." There was a light snarl. "And don't think I'm going to let him anywhere close to you again. He'll be moving to a Chiryunin apartment, next to his teammates." "He refused Jiraiya's offer of apprenticeship, Hiruzen," Danzo remarked. "Who are you going to entrust him to?" "Oh, that problem is taken care of," the Sandaime said. "And it's not about him, but his team. You wish to make him a lone Umbu operative, as you did with Itachi, but you will fail. I will guarantee you that, even if I have to use every single old bone in my body, I will make sure you fail." Danzo's lone eye narrowed. "Hiruzen, you are not." "I am," the Hokage remarked. "I do not know when you managed to get root in Umbu, but that's the problem with secretive organizations, when they're breached, nobody knows. You'd let them in a public Chiryunin team? Are you mad? They wouldn't last in the Chiryunin Corps. You cannot send the Jinhiriki of Konoha in the public corps." "You see, Danzo," Hiruzen whispered. "This is where we differ. You always saw the weapon to be oiled and primed. I, at least, see the shinobi as people." He shook his head. "Which is why Tobirama-sensei should have chosen you, and why at the same time I am glad he did not." "Believe in your light all you want, Hiruzen," Danzo replied. "I will tend to the darkness, as I have always done." "Playing with words now, are we? Don't we always?" The final match of the tournament is about to begin. All spectators, return to your seats. And as soon as the voice rang out, both Hiruzen and Danzo disappeared in a flicker at the same time. Deep within the confines of the Root headquarters, Sasuke headed towards the infirmary. The rest of his team was watching the matches in the arena through the television in the dining hall of this secret base, together with the Kyuzagaku or shinobi. There was practically no one, as the majority of guards had been assigned to patrol the tournament's proceedings. The door slid open without a sound, just in time for him to see Kabuto Yakushi ready to leave for somewhere. "Oh, Sasuke-kun," Kabuto said, surprised. "What's the matter? Were you wounded battling Shior-san?" "No," he replied calmly, a slight twitch in his right eye betraying some form of discomfort. "They are all watching the tournament, and I thought about your offer." How could he not, when he had seen just what powers Naruto wielded? He had been the second best, and yet now, clearly, he wasn't only the first. To Sasuke's eyes, he could very well be stronger than Itachi. Oh. Kabuto replied, raising both eyebrows. And what of it? I'll accept it. Splendid, Kabuto smiled as he suddenly dropped his backpack. It doesn't take much, he replied, moving towards one of the drawers. Just lay down on the bed and I'll take care of it. Sasuke nodded, taking his position on the nursery's bed and laying down. Kabuto moved closer with a simple needle. I'll give you a mild sedative, he added. No need to make it painful if we can avoid it. Wasn't it potentially fatal? Sasuke frowned. Shouldn't you be telling someone? I lied about that bit, Kabuto replied with a small smile. Wouldn't want you to go in this half-assed after all. With power must come determination, otherwise it's not worthy of being called power, is it? Sasuke exhaled slowly. Well, there went one of his last against arguments. The Chiryunin hadn't lied to him for anything less than what he'd expect, and really, who would let a Chiryunin offer a possibly lethal solution to a Genin to become stronger? Of course, the Hokage would say no to that. He had been so stupid to believe otherwise. Can you activate the Sharingan, Sasuke-kun? The enhancement requires chakra to be given to the eyes, to power them. He flinched for a moment, and when he looked up again, his Sharingan was active. In that moment, the Chiryunin struck with the syringe. The needle pierced his skin and the liquid entered his bloodstream. His body felt stiff. Kabuto Yakushi sighed before calmly remarking, as he took out a pair of tweezers. Tomo of both eyes half matured, it could be better, but it will have to do. He smiled gently to Sasuke-kun then, and that smile, that would be the last thing Sasuke would forever remember, burned to his memory, as without anesthetic, but fully awake and feeling the pain. The Chiryunin ripped out both his eyes from their sockets. I'll also take a few more samples. The Chiryunin's voice came through the fog and the haze of pain that coursed through Sasuke's entire body. Now, don't worry Sasuke-kun, it will be over soon. You know, how about I turn on the radio, so you can hear about who is going to win the tournament? No, this was a nightmare. He was going to wake up. The man hadn't just taken his Sharingan eyes. The man had told him they were similar. He had told him they both shared their ideal of revenge. Now, no use trying to fight off the poison, it will go away naturally, in a few hours. A heartbeat of silence soon followed. I'll be already out of the village by then, as the escort of the Otagakuer team leaving. The noise of the radio soon muzzled out the next words, as the 5 minutes of pause soon finished. In the arena, beneath the sun that had reached its apex, two genin looked at one another across a field that held Kakashi Hatake in the middle, ready to declare the start of the last match. Honorable Proctor! Rock Lee exclaimed, a moment if you please, I have a question to ask my opponent before we begin. Fine, Kakashi sighed. He was undecided between finding out what was going on with the numerous Umbu circling the arena, moving around like headless chickens, and taking out Ika violence fetish. Unyouthful beast. Rock Lee began pointing his finger at Naruto. My name is Rock Lee, the student of the youthful green beast of Konoha. He roared. Today I will defeat you, but I have to ask you this, why did you kill my teammate? What reason brought you to do this? What could my teammate have done to warrant your hate, that your next opponent did not? Naruto breathed deeply as his cold eyes settled on the boy who was still slightly sweaty from the battle he had barely finished before. I had a change of heart, he tried weakly. A chorus of butts and whistles rang through the crowd in the arena. Do not deceive me with those words. Rock Lee yelled back, earning himself applause from the same people in the stands. What did my teammate do to you? Naruto had to breathe again. Nothing, he replied, then steeling himself. I didn't even know her name before we were paired for the battle. I held no hatred, no contempt, and no anger against her strong enough to warrant me killing her. So why? Rock Lee's voice was a whisper as he asked, but it suddenly grew both heated and angered. Why did you kill her? Because, Naruto remarked. They made me do it. His finger pointed towards the crowd of Konoha. Hushed silence fell in the arena ground, as everyone tried to strain their necks from their seats to manage to hear the contestant speak. Naruto chuckled bitterly. Funny, isn't it? You want the real culprit? Look at the guys applauding you, the people who cheer for you and are so prone to insult me and call me demon. Ask them what they did to me, and you will have your answer. They believe themselves so special, so human. You know what is funny? The Kyuubi is probably more human than half the people in Konoha. I know his hatred is motivated by at least a good chunk of things I can understand. He laughed. You realize your life is truly fucked when you can sympathize with demons, you know? You want to know the true power of the Kyuubi? I am Malice. He screamed, taking a step forward. And it fucking hurts, because it's right and it's everywhere. You know your teammate? The dark side of me, the part that he pointed at the crowd, that they brought forth with their actions, that is who killed her. You ask why, I answer with another question, why would they act as if I was a demon from birth? I mean, one must really be fucked up in their mind to think something like that, right? Maybe they were afraid. Yeah, right. I used that excuse first. Maybe I did something bad for simply being born. That too went out of the gutter. I am the hierarchy of the Kyuubi. Is it enough to call oneself a monster? Apparently, for them, it is. Naruto laughed. He laughed so hard he had to hold his sides before starting to cough up. And guess what, even now, he choked out, even now he whispers, but he can't see me dead. He cannot, because if I go, he goes too, and the world burns. Fucked up, huh? Delusional, pathetic, but those are his words. He snarled, swiping his right arm in front of him. And he'll live with the fact that you will not listen to them, Naruto added then quietly. But it doesn't matter, his eyes narrowed as he hovered his hand to his tanto. Because I'll force those words down your ears, as I slice you apart for harming my teammate. You're delusional, Rock Lee whispered. Yosh. There is no choice then. I will defeat you, then. Kakashi swallowed hard. He had probably been the only one to hear the two boys speak, except for the parts they had screamed. Naruto was probably losing it because of the stress. He didn't know if the cages up in the booth had such a finely tuned hearing, but if they did, the crowd had probably settled only for the screamed bits. Their general humor was of hate for Naruto and acceptance for the hero of the tale. Kakashi raised his right hand. The moment it came down, Rock Lee's hands went down to his legs as he began to scream. Naruto's own body charged ahead, but in the precise moment his Yoroi Tanto was about to close in on Rock Lee's neck, the boy disappeared from sight. Two heavy whistling noises forced Naruto to get down, immediately avoiding two heavy weights that crashed against the ground. Had they hit, they would have lopped his head off cleanly. The boy was planning to murder him, all bets were off, he'd do the very same thing. It wasn't about being the dark side or the light side anymore, it was about having something called personal justice. So what if Konoha would hate him, starting the next day? When had it been different? He didn't want to settle this with death, but there was no other way. He knew the gaze the other boy had. It was that, I'm sorry I didn't actually mean to be that much mean to you, one. He'd be dead and then the boy would cry and someone would give him a pat on the shoulder, telling him everything was fine. It was just the demon boy, they'd say, or some sort of shit like that, maybe they'd even give him a medal. The weights had barbed hooks on one side, and tiny bits of flesh and reddish things attached to them. Was that how he avoided genjutsu? The moment the thought was done, he flew in midair by a powerful kick to the back of his spine. His breathing cut short, as he could suddenly feel Rock Lee's presence behind him. White wrappings tried to bind themselves to his hands, and in that instant, he pulsed chakra through the bundles in his jacket. He had come prepared to fight on his own terms, after all. Barbed wire unfolded in an explosive pattern, literally placing itself as a thorny cushion between Rock Lee's technique and Naruto's body. There wasn't the pain he needed, but the surprise was enough for Naruto to pull himself out of the technique and leave a bunshin in its place. Rock Lee's hands firmly grasped at the bunshin, tearing it apart in an instant. Naruto's own body propelled the Jinhuriki out and against the corner of arena, where his back slammed painfully against the wall. It was on instinct and nothing more that Naruto side-rolled to the right. That was how he avoided a hole the size of a watermelon on his chest, because the wall of the arena held a fist-shaped crack where the green blur that was Rock Lee attacked next. Naruto grabbed the steel wire he had, and unbundled it all. He didn't actually have a plan, but if he just had enough time to think. If the enemy has an advantage, take it away first. Speed. Strength. Taijutsu only. His legs are bleeding, duck. Naruto's body pressed against the ground as a roundabout kick nearly crushed his shoulders, instead passing harmlessly above his head. Take time. Talk. What's the youth shit about? Naruto screamed then, jumping back as Rock Lee apparently stopped to answer. You foul unyouthful demon. Do not talk ill of the fires of youth. Yosh. What's that shit about anyway? He snapped back as he caught his breath. He had a bundle of wire laying on the ground in a corner, just as in another the barbed wire was pretty much in the same position. He had two giant tumbleweeds of steel, how could he use them? Quantity over quality. It's about 9,000 bunshins materialized within the arena's floor and walls. Not 100, not 2,000, but 9,000 bunshins materialized around the entire arena on every available spot. Rock Lee's eyes widened as he watched Naruto clones in front of him smirk. You unyouthful person. You tricked me. I'm a shinobi, that's my job description, Naruto remarked. Rock Lee got on his guard, as he felt movement close to him, even if he couldn't pinpoint it. He breathed slowly, before starting to move his hands in a sort of semi-sphere pattern in front of him. The flames of youth will find you anyway, unyouthful demon. Up above, in the cage stands, the Nibijin hierarchy actually smirked. Isn't it against the rules to leave the arena? Technically he hasn't, the Otogaku cage replied. Unless we want to be nitpicky, of course. Well, to look underneath the underneath is supposed to be a shinobi prerequisite, Hiruzen said. I wonder what they said to one another, to make Naruto so angry. His name is Naruto. The question asked by the Takigaku female bodyguard had Suien actually grown lightly. Is he good to eat? Unaki snickered. Sure he is. I bet he's really crunchy too. No, Suien added hastily. He is not good to eat, he remarked calmly. And you will not try and eat him, phew. All right, the girl nodded dejectedly. Hiruzen raised an eyebrow, but the Takigaku cage simply returned a disarmed expression. He'd answer the question in private later on, if pressed. Why are your umbu moving around like chickens, Sandame? The Tsuchikage quipped, pointing at a few masked nin moving across the roof of the arena. They are simply patrolling the premises, Hiruzen replied. It was then, that the 9,000 bunshins disappeared. The arena looked completely deserted, without even a trace of Naruto, or of the bundles of wire. How does he plan to use them? Unaki's voice cut off, especially when Yujito's nose twitched slightly. That's quite a bit of chakra, Yujito whispered. And the genin down there can't feel it. The Otogaku cage replied in disbelief. How did he manage to make the cut for the shinobi force? The air was thick and laden with a strange pressure that Rock Lee had never felt before. He heard the ground tremble slightly, but then everything seemed to still as the wind itself stopped blowing around him. There was a light shimmer of something blue around him. That shimmer it became thicker was that the sound of flying shurikens. Rock Lee tried to jump backwards, only for the ground to finally crack and cave in beneath his feet. In that precise instant, Naruto rose upwards holding within his right palm a tornado-like creation made of pure unbridled chakra. It twisted savagely, as from way above Rock Lee's head hundreds of kunao and shurikens fell down as if the skies had decided to weep metal. The chakra of the hurricane expanded beyond what a normal shinobi could hope to contain, as it completely engulfed the falling Rock Lee and the assorted weaponry. Naruto yelled out a single word as he roared to the skies his triumph. Naruto Uzumaki. Rock Lee knew pain. He knew the feeling of his body burning up. He knew the pain that came from overexerting or from the weights carving in his skin. He knew the feeling of having his legs disinfected or of welts opening up. Yet he wasn't prepared when the entire armament that Naruto held on him fell down and began to circle around him, lifted by the chakra of the boy himself. A normal human would have died from chakra exhaustion before even creating such a technique. What happened instead was pain. The shurikens flew and tore like the blades of a grinder on a turbo streak. The kunao's tips pierced with terminal velocity at his body, just as the barbed and steel wires fell down and begun to spin wildly around him, lashing at his skin and latching on, to engulf him in a tomb of iron. Blood sprayed from the open wounds as the centrifugal force of the hurricane, of the maelstrom, of the whirlpool technique lashed and tore through his skin. In the next moment, the chakra-intensive technique finished. Rock Lee looked as if he had gone through a grinder, his green spandex suit in tatters as he fell seemingly lifelessly in the center of the crater. Naruto's own back went to drop against the rock surface of the crater's side, as the blonde-haired boy took in deep breaths to calm his beating heart. The crowd's stunned silence, soon followed by boos and whistles, told him all that he needed to know. He had won. He slowly stood, turning to give his back on the fallen form of his enemy to start the climb up, when he heard a soft murmur reach him. First gate, the murmur seemed to die down. Open. Naruto jumped out of the crater with the strength that adrenaline gave, as the wounded Rock Lee was hot on his tails, his entire body muscled and with the blank of his pupils showing clearly. This is, for Tenten, I will, avenge her. Second gate, open. Rock Lee's scream forced the audience to start cheering at the return of their champion. Naruto snarled. He was actually low on chakra, for once. Someone needs a hand. The Kyuubi mocked from his ear. No, Naruto replied. I don't. All he got back was a derisive snort, and nothing more. Die, demon. Third gate, open. Naruto took a step backwards, and the audience just cheered stronger. In that moment, Rock Lee charged ahead, foaming from his mouth. The first movement of any dagger is to stab forward. A blade either stabs or slashes. A punch is to the face first, for it is the weakest point in the human body. Rock Lee's charge stopped as the Yoroi Tonto tore through his entire protruding arm. Naruto's body twisted from the strength of the impact, as he ended up flying to the side, having hastily brought up the Tonto Danzo had gifted him to protect his face after enhancing it with whatever chakra he could muster. Rock Lee's right hand split neatly in hand, even as the boy still kept on charging, this time with his left hand forward, before sending a powerful kick to Naruto's still recuperating body. The blonde shinobi flew in the air once more, as blood kept on falling from the open wounds. He didn't feel pain. That wasn't going to end up well. He brought up his arms in a cross guard, hoping to weather the storm. The storm didn't sound at all weathered, if the cracking and the snapping were of any indication. He had used up all his tricks. He had fought with everything he had. He had fought against someone who was literally charging ahead in a suicide attack and was cornering him, and he didn't want to die. As his guard came down from the pain, and Rock Lee's left fist came forth to smash his face to a bloody pulp. A wall of sand and blood stopped the blow from even forming. Naruto winced as he ended up falling on the ground, gently carried by a light platform of sand. He exhaled slowly. What was that about? The sand, wasn't it, the Ichibais? I knew that thing didn't belong to my brother. The Kyuubi snarled out angrily. It belonged to the boy. He wasn't going to question the Kyuubi's anger. He was just glad his face hadn't turned to some sort of poultice. Whatever technique the spandex-wearing boy had used, it fell short as soon as he touched the ground, sending him to stumble, wobble for a bit, and then crash down hard. Naruto slowly breathed in the crisp hot air of the midday sun. What had seemed like hours had been but minutes, and as the adrenaline and the tension wore off, he couldn't help but start to giggle. His giggle soon turned into a full-out bout of laughter as his voice resonated throughout the entire arena. There are no heroes in here, Naruto exclaimed with glee. Only monsters and madmen. He turned to stare at the proctor, his smile settling down after a few more snorts and chuckles. What a mess, Kakashi sighed then, shaking his head as the medic Nin entered quickly the arena, to take care of the fallen form of Rock Lee. The winner of the Chunin exams is hereby declared to be Naruto Uzumaki. The voice of the proctor sounded fully in the silent arena. Nobody applauded. Nobody clapped their hands or even did anything remotely like a cheer in his direction. In that silence interrupted only by the slight breeze of the wind. Naruto never felt more alone in his life. In the hospital, Sakura Haruno opened her eyes to the stern gaze of the icy blue orbs of Inoichi Yamanaka and her sensei, who were both looking at her critically. How are you feeling now, Sakura? Her sensei asked her quietly. Sensei. Sakura whispered in her low voice. Everything hurts. It's all right now, Yojeo nodded firmly. You'll heal. Just get some rest, all right. She frowned for a moment. Why am I here? You went against Niji, and you fought well, but in the end, well, you knocked out each other. Yojeo's voice was soft as Inoichi simply left the room in silence, after giving one single glance to the woman. So, well, you're in the hospital, right, your parents left the village for some visit to Odafukugai, do you have any relatives there? No, Sakura mumbled meekly. But they do go there to talk with the suppliers for the bakery, the girl added. She frowned. They didn't tell me. Her voice was barely hearable, but more than enough for Yojeo to answer back. In their absence, as your Jounin-sensei, I have been named your guardian, the woman replied. You'll be fit for duty in a few weeks, until then rest and... The woman's face turned into a smirk. You have an appointment with the Hokage the following week, together with the rest of your teammates. She winked. I already forwarded the measurements for your Chiryunin flak jacket. Sakura's eyes widened in disbelief, before a smile appeared on her face as her heart menaced to burst. She had won. She was a Chiryunin. She was a Chiryunin like her teammates. She swiped away her tears with the back of her hand, ignoring the slight pain that she felt from her fingers' soreness. It felt as if she had been kneading dough for hours. How had she reduced her hands like that? She sort of recalled a blurry bad moment that began in a forest, but nothing more. Yojeo Izuki left her student in the room and walked outside, closing the door behind her silently and turning to gaze at Inoichi. They walked outside, disappearing in a flicker and reappearing on a rooftop, where Inoichi began to talk. The memories were suppressed, not erased, he said calmly. To erase memories is a punishment for any Yamanaka found guilty with execution, he added then. Her psyche worked on her own, however, there was no recollection of the events on the forefront, but in the back of her mind, either a skilled Yamanaka inserted the memories of her killing her parents, or there really is no doubt on her being the culprit. The Hokage. I know, Inoichi replied. I did watch the tournament. We cannot allow the Jinhiriki to be any more destabilized than he is now. Treat him with shinobi gloves. In the months of training to be fully brought in the Chiryunin ranks he should have calmed down, and there are the obligatory psychological evaluations. Should I look out for something? If... Inoichi's voice lowered itself to a murmur. Listen, he has abandonment issues that can only even remotely compare to the same ones as Anko Mitarashi, and while she had both psychologically and physical abuse on her from her beginning as a genin, Naruto's psychological abuse comes from his very first memories. He wasn't physically manhandled at all during his life, except of course when it came to the beginning of his shinobi career, but it doesn't change the fact that you are not dealing with normal persons. Whenever are we normal? She snorted. If she had to say it to herself, that snort was completely genuine. You aren't right now. You are devoid of emotions, and act based on hearsay, mimicking the interactions you see others do. Sakura Haruno will probably have triggers, like seeing a forest or a specific sound or smell. When she has one of those, bring her back to the present. She was literally imprinted with some sort of prey-predator mentality, and Anko didn't want a repeat of Orochimaru, so she's not only fiercely loyal to Konoha, but she's going to have a terrible complex concerning her teammates. Do not separate them. Anko tied her traumas to the pack figure of the forest of death tigers. You separate them? She will attack you like you're the devil possessed. Sigh. Sigh's normal, Inoichi shrugged. Out of them all he is the one who probably has been broken at some point in the past, but judging by how he was sleeping when I delved in his mind, I can't tell you more. Yojeo looked to the monument with the faces of the Konoha Hokage on it, before taking a single, deep breath. So what should I really look out for during missions? If Naruto starts laughing diffuse whatever it is before he gets a chance to speak, Inoichi began calmly. If Sakura starts to shiver or mutter something to herself, intervene immediately. If one of the two cracks, then the other will soon follow. And if the ones who cracked do something to the other, the guilt complex could lead you to 2 potential suicides. So I've got madmen beneath me now. Yojeo actually chuckled honestly. That's just like my Umbu days, only they were my teammates. Yes, we usually send these cases to Umbu to begin with, Inoichi whispered. The training strips operative of most of their emotions, which works well, for as long as it can. The Jinhyuriki, however, he can't become a secretive figure. He has to be public. Do some big shot actions to restore his morale and that of the village. You should be glad there isn't a war front open, or they'd probably send him over there to pull some weight and come back a decorated hero or... A hawk screeched up in the sky. No hawks screeched unless an urgent jounin above trouble emerged that required all jounin to be present. Since the tournament was winging to a close, however, it probably was to reform the teams that had lost members within and to get the bureaucratic parts over. We'll talk more about this later then, Yojeo said. Inoichi just nodded back, before they both disappeared once more. Back in the hospital, her worried father forced Hinata in her bed, not that his face showed it, but she liked to believe he was actually worried for her. Naruto was dead. There was no other explanation. That thing wasn't Naruto. It couldn't be. The Kyuubi had killed Naruto. Her Naruto had been killed by a foul demon. Naruto-kun was. She began to cry and moan in pain, even as the doctors arrived to sedate her. Her Byakugan activated on instinct the next moment, as she slammed her palm against the one closest to her before they could even get as far as stick a sedative in her body. They still managed to sedate her once her body gave away to her tiredness. As Hinata slumped down into a restless sleep, and the doctors began to work on the various stitches that had reopened along her sides, Hayashi slightly tensed the muscles in his right hand it wouldn't do to clench it and walked outside. Calmly, he activated the Byakugan just in time to see Rock Lee brought in the intensive care unit by the doctors, but his gaze settled elsewhere. He exhaled slowly as he made his way to where Niji was. His brother's son was already awake, his gaze settled on the ceiling. As he walked in, he could see the boy's eyes move towards him, before his entire frame tensed like that of a deer ready to run. Niji. Hayagawa-sama, the boy replied bowing. There was silence between the two. Have you been told? I activated the Byakugan the moment I awoke, Niji whispered. I saw the entire thing. It was unfortunate, Hayashi acquiesced quietly. He will not pay for it, will he? Niji remarked. It is fate that some people are simply destined to die without being avenged. Hayashi's breath quivered for a moment, before the head of the Hyuga clan moved his gaze sideways, as he headed towards the window. And you were trying to claim your revenge, by attacking Hinata in the forest. I wanted her scroll, Niji bristled. I had no intention to harm her. Whether a lie or not, Hayashi replied. Ultimately, you went against the heiress of the clan and caused her demise. I have come to terms with my actions. Indeed, as the clan too has, Hayashi nodded slowly. You know, the man whispered. Your father was not sacrificed by the elders of the clan, he added. He chose that end for himself. Of course, Hayagawa-sama. You don't believe me, do you? It is not my place to say, Hayagawa-sama. The silence came back and stretched uncomfortably for a few more seconds. Would you like to train with the main branch? Another heartbeat of silence settled in. Niji's eyes looked towards the back of Hayashi, who was still gazing outside the window. The man's posture wasn't tense, at least to the casual observer, but the Hyuga clan head was actually averting his gaze from him by simply looking at something else. There was nothing of interesting outside of the window, which Niji could discern without even activating his own Byakugan. Why? Because potential wasted is something I find distasteful, Hayashi added. And because, if I have to choose the dagger to strike at my back, I prefer yours, the man exhaled slowly. At least it would feel like repaying the debt I have with your father. I don't believe you on my father's demise. I know, Hayashi nodded. I know. Niji exhaled this time, clenching both hands against the fabric of the bed sheet, before finally closing his eyes and nodding quietly. I will need time to think about it. Very well. With those two words, Hayashi turned and left the room. Niji lowered his back against the pillow of his bed, as he let out a breath of relief he didn't know he was holding. Niji? What are you going to do after you make Chiryunin? A kunai thrown, again the same move. Whatever fate decides. Spoil sport, she had grinned, like she always did. I'm going to become a medic nin and a long-range expert. Isn't it impossible? Why? Tsunade-sama can both fight and heal, she's the best. And who would teach you both? It isn't your fate to become Tsunade. She had lowered her gaze. And why not? She had grown angry. I can damn well try, can't I? To go against fate is. Then fate should just get the hell away. Tenten had screamed, pointing her right accusing finger at him. You won't know until you try anyway, right? So maybe it is fate for me to be both rather than neither. Unless you try, how can you be so sure? To that, he had not answered. Niji's eyes settled on the door sliding open again, to admit one of the medics. It was then that Niji asked a question he didn't think he'd ever ask. Naruto Uzumaki was given quite the berth when he walked out of the arena and towards the hospital. He was in luck he could use the rooftops, because from the few meters done on the ground he just knew his life in Konoha had plummeted from barely acceptable to outright demon to exorcise. He ignored the looks and the harsh insults that were sent his way, as he reached for the hospital. As he entered the double doors, silence fell around the waiting room. He walked towards the receptionist, who seemed to be fighting between keeping professional and sniping at him some insults. He just looked at her. My team, he said calmly. Where are they? Room 9F and 10D, 6th floor and 4th floor respectively, the receptionist replied smoothly. He nodded and left. The mass hysteria of murmurs and whispers that followed behind him was like a cloud of deep putrid air that lingered and felt heavy upon Naruto's shoulders. He reached for the 4th floor, opening the door only to find Sai asleep and bandaged heavily. The boy's skin was pale. Naruto grimaced, clenching his fists as he turned to let the boy sleep and head towards the other room. The 10th floor was the one for the mild cases, or just the observation. He opened the correct room and then tensed. The bed was empty. He had a kunai in his hand before he had taken even a single step inside, and he was hiding in a corner of the room before he could even think properly about the fact that there was no danger going on around. He felt somewhat stupid by the time he decided to come out. Sakura herself had been in the bathroom, and the moment she came out, she let out a startled and half-whispered eep at seeing him emerge from the shadows. Naruto? Sakura whispered. Ai, Sakura, he replied with a bitter smile and a hand wave. How are you? He asked, medic treating you well? She rolled her eyes and sat down on the edge of the bed, just as Naruto took the chair to sit in front of her. Yeah, her voice was barely a whisper, as Naruto's eyes went to glance at her neck scar with guilt flowing to his face. I shouldn't be moving, she added slowly. But I can't stay still. She slowly laid down on the bed after that, exhaling slowly. It's easy now to ignore the pain. One gets used to it, Naruto remarked. It just dulls out after a while. How did it go? Sakura asked. Did you fight Sai? No, he shook his head. I fought Tenten, then Kuratsuki and Rock Lee. Sakura frowned. I won against Niji, yeah, I did, she smiled wistfully. How did your fights go? Can we talk about something else? He pleaded her with a slight worry in his voice. Anything else? Sakura closed her eyes for a moment, trying to visibly ignore the bright pink elephant in the room as she struggled to find the question she wanted to ask. Do you want to go out? She finally croaked. When I'm out of here, to eat something somewhere. She hastily added in her whispered voice. Naruto clenched his hands tightly. He passed them through his hair a moment later, before finally replying. Some things happened, he finally acquiesced. I probably won't be in the team any. No. Sakura actually growled as she grabbed his jacket and pulled him towards her. No. She added, her eyes hard and narrowed on his face. Sakura. I said no. Understood. She hissed. Hi, he whispered. But I. No, she said once more. You don't get to walk away, whatever happened, whatever is going to happen, you don't get to walk away from me. She let him go a moment later, her face softening up as her eyes went to the ceiling. My parents are out of town, I sent Yojao-sensei to get me some things from my house but, can I get some dango from Hebai? please. Naruto swallowed hard, before nodding once. Ah, Naruto. Sakura said then just as he was standing up. Yeah, Sakura. We're Chiryunin, she smiled. All of us, Sensei said so. He looked out of the window. I see, it's good, right? Of course it is, silly, she murmured. It means we get to learn elemental techniques, aren't you happy about that? You always yelled to Iruka-sensei about learning cool techniques. He scratched the back of his head. I did. He said. I didn't even remember. I'll be going then, Sakura. I'll be back as fast as I can. The moment he left, Sakura's eyes narrowed. Her pack mate was afraid of something. Her teammate was dancing around the issue of the tournament as if it was some scalding poisonous fruit. She had to know what it was that troubled him, and then she had to kill the trouble to the root. She looked around. Firstly, she had to find the rest of her pack and then she had to find where the trouble was. Nobody hurt her team and lived. Nobody. The Sandame's pipe snapped in half the moment the Umbu finally reported their findings to him. The rest of the assembled Jounin stood pale in lines in front of his desk. Not only were they not talking, they all were as shocked as he was. The Hokage's eyes were wide in shock, as he slowly began to take a step out from behind his desk and towards the elemental country's map. He had believed Orochimaru was going to attack Konoha for some reason. He had been blind to the bigger threat. He had even asked Suna to mobilize their army. Then Orochimaru had attacked Takigakure. And he hadn't stopped there. He had moved towards Kusagakure. What is the status of Kusan now? They fell to inner turmoil, the Umbu replied. The prison, it was breached and the prisoners freed. Hiruzen grimaced. And what of the situation with the Uchiha? Unfortunately, it is confirmed. Kabuto Yakushi was a spy. Hiruzen's growl grew to the point where the Umbu had to take a step back, as the Sandame slammed his fist against the wall in front of him. He was a Chiryunin and a medic nin. How could he pass all the tests? He had to take them with a Yamanaka, right? They always came back clean, Hokage-sama. The Umbu replied. Medical Director Nobuo Yakushi has been taken into custody and is being interrogated, but he seems clean. What of Otagakure? I cannot believe they attacked while we had their cage here. Reports indicate the few plants we had in their village have been killed, the Umbu stated. The same can be said for Takigakure and the Kusagakure nin have stopped contacting. Even those in Sunagakure have gone silent. The ones in Suna worry me more, Hiruzen remarked. Try and find out what happened. We are allies of Taki and Kusa, and while I'd wish for nothing more than to see Unaki die in an ambush, we should actually try and reclaim the lost countries before Orochimaru has a chance to infiltrate their systems. If he does, it will be extremely difficult to root him out. Should the state of war be declared? No, Hiruzen sighed. As much as it pains me, Konoha isn't ready for a war on multiple fronts, not against Orochimaru anyway. If we had. He drummed on the desk with his fingers as he sat back down. Reinforce the border patrols. Start stamping the pamphlets for contingency TS. The Umbu tensed, as did the Jounin in the room. Sir. It has gone on long enough, Hiruzen replied with his eyes hardening. We will settle this once and for all. Sir, with all due respect. Begin the contingency, soldier. Understood, Hokage-sama. With a flash, the Umbu was gone. He clenched his right hand and looked over at the results of the exams. Before he could debrief the Jounin present however, another Umbu appeared in the room, extremely agitated. Hokage-sama. What is it, now? He snapped back. The Umbu recoiled as if struck, before standing to attention. It's, Kiri, Hokage-sama, they have lost the civil war. The rest of the Jounin assembled assisted then to a peculiar sight. The Hokage, the Sandame, and the one also known as the Kami of Shinobi, he began to curse aloud every single god or existence of the beyond there was. That was not a good day to be a Jounin. Elsewhere, Orochimaru simply walked past the giant black cube that was supposed to be an artifact of a civilization long gone, tearing his kusanagi out of the body of the prison leader who held a name of no importance. Anyone else? He mock asked to the rest of the prisoners. No? Good. Hebai! He exclaimed, snarling as his assistant moved forward. Take care of them. Get their names and ranks. From this moment hence, you are all shinobi of Otogakur, understood? There was loud swallowing and hastily made nods. Good. Then Orochimaru turned to leave. And pack the cube up. We'll bring it along the way. Nobody dared to refuse, even when they knew just what the box contained. The Snake Sunin just smiled. It was good to be on time on a schedule. Chapter 32, The Fifth brings the stare down to an end. There was the light beeping sound of a heartbeat monitor working, in the depths of hospital. In the intensive care area, that had seen far more work than normal since the start of the exams, a lone figure dressed in a green spandex suit watched over the comatose body of his pride student. He couldn't help but feel at fault, for not having convinced Rock Lee with words. At the same time, he felt glad he was still alive. Even the split limb was not a problem, and with enough training, the boy would be able to return to active service within a few weeks. Mato-gai moved out of the room with careful tiptoeing steps. He could be loud when he wanted to, but he also knew when to be quiet. It was as he was walking across the corridor to reach for Niji's room that he stumbled across a pink-haired kunoichi who was literally ignoring a nurse trying to convince her to return to her room. Harano-san, you shouldn't be moving, the nurse bit her lip as she tried once more to move her hand on the girl's shoulder, only for her to snarl in her direction. I'm fine, she snapped back, holding her stomach with her right hand. You said he was on the 4th floor, right? Yes, but Harano-san you shouldn't. I'm a kunoichi, I can live with this pain. She snarled in a low-toned hiss, showing her teeth, before she stopped to gaze long and hard with her emerald eyes at Mato-gai's form. The jounin had remained to watch the scene unfold. You've seen something you like, eyebrow freak. That is a most unyouthful accusation, Mato-gai replied calmly. And you are most unyouthful at. You're Rock Lee's sensei, right? Sakura interrupted him then, and this time, her gaze was wary. I am, he replied with a nod. But you do not have to worry, I am above petty revenge. What are you talking about? Sakura frowned. There was genuine ignorance behind her eyes, something that made Mato-gai still for a second. What happened during the tournament? Nobody wants to tell me anything, that's why I'm going to get the answer from Sai. The pervert is probably drawing porn or turning himself blind if there is no one there to keep an eye out on him anyway. The kunoichi huffed, her voice low and throaty. Your teammate did not tell you. Mato had to admit it to himself. At the word teammate he had lowered his voice a moment in a slight show of emotion, but he hadn't expected the girl to catch on to that and suddenly change her posture. No, she growled lightly. You have a problem with Naruto. She met his eyes head-on, as if she was a beast seeking a confrontation. I do not approve of his unbecoming conduct in regards with my students, Mato-gai replied frostily. He killed one of them and brought the other in intensive care. The kunoichi paled. What? No, Naruto would never do something like that. She shook her head firmly. Why don't you ask him then? Mato-gai remarked. Now, if you'll excuse me, I will meet with the only student I have left that will not need months of rehab and training to return effective. He disappeared afterwards, leaving behind Sakura, who felt sapped of her strengths. Naruto? No, Naruto had to have had a good reason for doing that. She'd ask him afterwards. As it was, it took her a few more minutes to reach Sai's room, even with the nurse constantly nagging to her about risking her health to worsen again. She entered anyway, rumbling as she grabbed a chair to sit down next to the pale and sleeping form of her teammate. The nurse huffed. I'll send an intern if you are not back in your bed by dinner time. My place is here, Sakura deadpanned back with a light growl, her low-key voice making it even more threatening. Just try it. The nurse brought her hands up in the air before leaving, clearly tired of insisting against a mule. Sakura huffed back, crossing her arms over her chest, and wincing as she felt her muscles' soreness. She didn't cry out, no use making the nurse turn back or whatever, she could stand the pain, nor did she have teary eyes. She just stayed there, breathing slowly to calm herself, as she made sure that Sai was indeed still breathing and alive. She looked towards the window and then towards the door. They were both unguarded. She frowned. When was Naruto going to come back? She widened her eyes then. Naruto had gone out to take food. How was he supposed to know she had moved? No, she had to calm down. It wouldn't do to ventilate needlessly. He would go first in her room, and then he would go inside. Yes, he'd do that. She knew tigers did that. They sniffed their young when they went astray, and roared when they found someone else had been eating them roasted. Always prey on the weak. Show no mercy to the young. They won't give you any favor after all. They never do. Sasuke Uchiha awoke to darkness. Darkness was all he saw. In the deepest pits of hell, he supposed this was how sinners suffered. They were suffering for their sins of betrayal, forever unable to do what they needed to obtain the pardon of their family. His eyes had been taken and, in that horrible darkness that scared him out of his wits, a voice smoothly spoke to him. Uchiha. The voice was stern and cold, alien to his ears. It wasn't a caring one like a doctor or a nurse could be, and it clearly didn't seem like a fan having made his way through whatever security the hospital had. My eyes, he croaked. Your stupidity knows no bounds, the voice gutturally replied. To accept a boon from someone you merely knew for a while, to be blinded in your desire of revenge, that is the reason why I find it fitting for you to be now in this condition. Who are you? He asked. The voice did not reply to that question. I am no one of importance, and yet I cannot help but find myself disgusted. What were you thinking, when you acted that way? His voice was raspy. What possessed you to do that? I wanted revenge on Itachi. Sasuke exclaimed hotly to the darkness. And you didn't see it fitting to ask someone else for it. They always sympathized, Sasuke snarled. They taught me silly tricks. And yet you were the first in the academy, the voice whispered. You were the blessed heir of the Uchiha clan, the last descendant, and now? Now you're a fangless snake. You aren't even worthy of being used for reproduction, because you were made sterile. The stern tone turned frosty. You were a fruit tree, and now that your fruits have been plucked and you are drying up, there is nothing left of worth in you. And no, Sasuke whispered, clenching his fists tightly. Who are you? No one important. The voice snarled back. What is important, is what you wish to be, it soothingly replied. Tell me, do you wish to be strong, to be the best? Do you wish to avenge your clan, and kill Itachi? Yes. He screamed out to the top of his lungs. Why wasn't a nurse coming in, or a doctor? Who was the lunatic? He could not see. He couldn't see him and he was afraid of the feeling of powerlessness he had running through his veins. Then I'm sorry, the voice replied calmly, because you will never set foot out of the village again. Sasuke screamed and tried to claw at the voice, whoever he was, but his limbs found only air. Soon he was strapped down to the bed and sedated by what he hoped were the medics, but even then his screams rose to the point they became shrieks, and then they became sobs as blood dribbled down his cheeks in the place of tears. As he lost consciousness, he sincerely hoped never having to wake up again. He had lost, after all. He would never avenge his clan. Inoichi Yamanaka stepped outside the room, gazing at the Hokage calmly as he gave his report. He is unfit for duty. I suggest putting off the transplant of normal eyes until he is declared fit for normal genin chores. Hiruzen exhaled. The objective never was Naruto, the Sandaime murmured. It was Sasuke. The Sharingan, Inoichi nodded. Yes, in retrospect, I should have known. Busy as he was in researching everything, he always had a fixation with the Uchiha's Sharingan. I suggest assigning him an aide for the first times, the Yamanaka replied. And then someone to generally keep an eye on him. He is no longer able to reproduce, and at his death, the finances of the Uchiha would end up to the Hokage, who is old and cranky. Hiruzen finished the other man's thought. And he might just look the other way if we forge a document or two. Isn't that right, Inoichi? That was not my. I know what you really meant. The Sandaime's eyes narrowed. Anyway, Hiruzen shrugged, I have another meeting in the hospital to attend to, he added. One I hope to actually enjoy. He flickered out, leaving behind the head of the Yamanaka clan. The Sandaime's steps took him to where he had supposed the medical staff would treat Naruto, but the room he entered was empty. He frowned slightly, before finally shaking his head and heading off towards the room of his teammate Sakura. He supposed it was something called young love. He was wrong once more, and at the same time right. He did enter to see Naruto in the room, but at the same time, the girl was missing. "Naruto?" he asked, startling the boy who was looking around nervously, holding one of Hebai's big congratulation sweet packages. How the man managed to remain in the green with his shop after all the food he purposefully gifted around. "Ah, Hokage-sama," Naruto bashfully took a step backwards. "I think I entered the wrong room but—" "I don't think so," the old shinobi shook his head. "Maybe she went to look for your teammate." "Oh, right," Naruto sheepishly scratched the back of his head. "Naruto?" "Yes, Hokage-sama." "You can stop," the Sandaime sighed, his eyes narrowing on the boy. "It doesn't work." Naruto's eyes hardened as he gave out a bitter chuckle. "I suppose I can't fool you, nah." "Naruto, listen," Hiruzen took a step forward, only for Naruto's right hand to move up with the palm wide, clearly telling him to stop. "I'm sorry, will not work," he spat out calmly. "You could have told me of my father at any moment in the last year, or did I still lack the maturity then? You could have told me of the Kyuubi since I was 6, but you didn't. You could have told me a lot, but you left me to rot in ignorance, to let me fester among those glares and the stares of the others. You left me alone." He hissed. "I don't need you any longer, old man," he shook his head, gazing downwards. "I stopped leaning on you a long time ago." "I see," there was a wistful face on Hiruzen, as he softly made a small smile. "All grown up then? No longer a child, all ready to battle and kill in the name of Konoha." There was a moment of silence, before the Hokage chuckled back. "No, not in the name of Konoha, but in the name of your team, isn't that right?" He nodded back. "There's no use lying to you, is there?" "I thought pretty much the same thing once," Hiruzen bitterly replied, smiling as he watched Naruto's eyes widen. "I had just lost a teammate, in the midst of the shrapnel and the blood. I thought, why? Why am I fighting for a village that did this? Why am I fighting when this cause isn't mine to begin with? Why am I fighting for money?" And that was when I realized I was being a hypocrite, the Sandaime said calmly. "I could blame the world, I could blame the gods, but in the end, I was the one who chose the forehead protector. I could have been a farmer, you know? My younger brother was all set to become my change if I didn't want the duty of becoming the clan head through the shinobi service." He shook his head. "If you think you can recriminate now about what has already happened, because of your choice, then don't give me that bullshit." Naruto snapped. "What else could I have done?" "You could have come to me," Hiruzen replied. "You could have told me you didn't want to be a shinobi. I'm the Jinchuriki, you would have made a shinobi anyway." "No," Hiruzen's eyes hardened. "I would have not. What ifs don't change the present." Naruto swept his right hand in front of him. "I've been forced to. Spare me the drama." Hiruzen's voice grew now, slightly heated. "You think you had it tough? Please. Watch your mother blow up because of a missing nin attack, and then come back and cry about your misery. I never had a choice. You never asked for one. So it's what, a trip to the extraction center?" Naruto growled. "No," the Sandaime shook his head. "Naruto, the world is not made only of backstabbers or glares," Hiruzen spoke calmly. "It is also made of forgiveness and understanding." Slowly, he brought his right hand to lay on the boy's shoulder. "There isn't only hate in the world, there is also love." Naruto fidgeted. He closed his eyes and groaned, trying to come up with an answer. Finally, he seemed to find one, as his eyes opened once more to stare at the Hokage. "So because of love, you sealed the Kyuubi into me? Because of love, my father decided I was to become the Jinchuriki of Konoha? Are you sure this is the sign of love? Because..." His right hand gestured around him. This isn't love. I haven't felt love on my skin since I was 6. What do you think this is, a cheesy novel? The hero doesn't win in the end," Naruto chuckled. "He never does." Hiruzen frowned. "No, he doesn't," he acquiesced. "But by living, by fighting, maybe he can give hope for someone who will come later?" You should know not to blame the children. I do not know why people insist on calling them an example of honesty and innocence when they clearly aren't. They're egoistical, spoilt, ill-mannered. Frankly, they should be called an example of chaos rather than one of innocence. There was one last sigh from the Sandaime, soon followed by the old shinobi gesturing for the exit of the room to the boy. You should go and be with your teammates. No insisting. Naruto's eyes narrowed in suspicion. Naruto, trust me, Hiruzen smiled. If I thought you really were a menace for Konoha, you wouldn't have taken one more step anywhere without me hounding you. With those words, the Sandaime left the room sporting the briefest of smiles on his face. He hadn't come there to excuse Konoha's temperament. He had come there to make sure he knew what strings he could pull, and which he could not. Naruto on the other hand left in a hurry, carrying the package with the food in his right hand. He ignored the looks of the medical personnel, their purposefully blocking of his path with things or their words that came when he gave his back to them. He ignored them, but that didn't mean he wasn't listening to them. He finally reached Sai's room, slowly opening it. His gaze settled on Sakura's sleeping form, her face burrowed on the side of Sai's bed. Sai was wide awake, his eyes looking in disbelief from him to the girl. Dickless, help, he mouthed. Before Kinky rapes me, save me. I'm too beautiful to go. Sakura moaned slightly as she heard him walk inside and close the door behind himself. Pervert, Naruto whispered. I got you your death soup, he remarked. I see, Sai replied. Did you pass, Dickless? I suppose I did, he answered. We all did, believing Sakura, he murmured. Have they checked on you? Sai queried. That much sappiness cannot be normal. I'm fine, Naruto replied. My arms hurt just a little. If you say so, Sai acquiesced, bringing his eyes back to the sleeping form of Sakura. Is Kinky Cherry implying a threesome with this? Even in her sleep, Sakura's right hand shot forward to punch Sai to the side of his face, but without any real strength, it simply looked as if she had given him a small buff to the cheek. Does she do that on reflex now? Naruto whispered with a light smirk. A comfortable silence settled in the room, as Naruto finished unpacking the food. Slowly he nudged Sakura's shoulder to wake her up. The girl's eyes fluttered for a second, before she seemed to be sniffing the air and purring. The next instant, her eyes opened completely as she made a small yawn while stretching. Food, Naruto sighed, handing over the dango to the girl. Thanks, she muttered back. They ate in silence, the girl every now and then checking towards the window and then the door as if expecting someone to walk in at any moment. Naruto remained quietly munching on his ramen for a while, until a question startled him out of his thoughts. Naruto? Sakura asked suddenly. Yeah. Can I have some? She said, her gaze pointing at his bowl. He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as he handed over the bowl and the chopsticks. Sakura looked at the broth and the noodle, her hand holding onto the cup as if it was some sort of relic. Her face was suddenly brimming with tears, as she croaked out through racked sobs. It's warm. Dickless, you made Cherry cry. Sai's voice was actually deadly serious as he spoke then, narrowing his gaze on Naruto's own with the most powerful glare one who had an emotionless face could muster. Sakura. What's the matter? Naruto queried, his voice filled with concern. She stammered, if I'm good I'll have dango, she murmured. If I'm really good, I can have warm things. Her face pressed against Naruto's chest the next moment, the bowl of ramen forgotten and yet tightly held by her hands, as if afraid, as if she thought someone would spill it or would come and steal it from her. Naruto's throat constricted, as he didn't know what to do, until finally both his arms decided for him. He hugged tightly the girl's frame and held her as she cried her tears, softly whispering to her ear words he had repeatedly used for himself in his youth. It's all right, he murmured, everything's fine, he added. You're safe now, he gently caressed her hair. It's all over. She stammered, before stopping, and simply staying there, like that. After a few minutes, Sakura's breathing became deep and firm, as if she were taking his scent like a dog or a wolf. You smell of blood, she whispered after detaching herself slowly. It's nice. She added that with a small smile, her tone girlish and a light blush on her face. Sai smells of blood too, she remarked as an afterthought. We all smell of blood. She clapped her hands together once, before erupting into a fit of giggles, as if she had just made an inside joke only she was partaking of. Sakura, Naruto smiled hesitantly, didn't you want to eat the ramen? Before it becomes cold. The girl's eyes widened, and then she quickly scampered to take the bowl she had left on the bed desk, slurping it down as if it would evaporate otherwise. The moans of pleasure she made while eating it were the very same Naruto used to make, and to that, he actually had to chuckle too. Cherry, Sai deadpanned. I don't smell of blood. She nodded as her mouth was full. Yes you do. She said between slurps. Onshit's a enish smell. Don't speak with your mouth full, Sai replied. Swallow before speaking. That sounds dirty, Sakura rebuffed the boy with a chuckle. Pervert. I was stating the obvious, Sai raised an eyebrow. You are the kinky one. So I'm the only one not perverted. Naruto sighed in mock despair. What have I done to get perverts in my team? The harem lord thus spoke, Sai remarked dryly. And he was the one not perverted. Well, Naruto stuttered, clearly caught red-handed. Sakura watched Naruto try to defend himself with embarrassment clearly visible on his face, and couldn't help but laugh once more. This was good. This was her team, her pack, her friends, this was where she was meant to be. Ahem, there was a slight coughing sound as the door opened to admit a man with bright white hair and holding on its back a giant scroll. I didn't know about that title, Naru-chan. Jiraiya of the Sun-In chuckled as he watched the boy turn and stare at him with clear surprise. What, was he expecting him to disappear after their interesting lessons on peeking and mock imitating the Raise-Non? Jiraiya-sama, Naruto spoke calmly, trying to act like the controlled little genin he was. I am not Naru-chan. Oh, right. Harem Lord Naruto-sama. Jiraiya clapped his hands together. Well. Very well, I have heard from a little bird that I'm watching the new Chiryunin of Konoha. The Hokage is not a little bird, Sai remarked calmly. And a little bird can't be Hokage. Ignore him, Jiraiya-sama, Sakura spoke firmly, but with a wary tone. Jiraiya didn't need his people-person skills to understand she was judging him based on Naruto's reactions, rather than her own personal opinion. He supposed he had to expect that, if Inoichi's psychological statement was of any worth. What is the reason one of the three Sun-In of Konoha has to be here now? That's the fighting spirit I like to see in the youth of today, he winked at the girl, before gesturing at the blonde boy. I taught him well, didn't I? I am, after all, the gallant Jiraiya. It's only natural he manages to get women everywhere he so wishes. So. Her voice was now dripping with venom and felt frosty, just like Tsunade's when he was found peeking on her. You are the reason. She continued calmly, too calmly, he has hussies and whores following him around. Ahem, no, he hastily flailed his arms in front of him. I taught him afterwards. But henceforth, yeah, listen kid, he said with the utmost serious tone he could muster. Never, ever, form a harem. He brought his right index finger upward as if instructing a baby on the important things never to do. Find a nice girl, one, and then pledge your heart to her, understood? And never betray that pledge. That's the way of the gallant Jiraiya. Jiraiya-sama, Sai said calmly. Aren't you a porn and smut writer said having hundreds of lovers everywhere in the elemental countries? Learn what I teach, not what I do. The toad sage squawked out immediately. Oh. Sakura's hand went protectively around Naruto's shoulder. Her eyes narrowed. And what type of porn writer, goody two-shoes smut wanker would ever want with my teammate that is not some sort of move to corrupt or send him down the same dark path of whoring that the man-whore with white hair is going through? Yes, he had just lost any chance of respect from the pink-haired girl. I offered Naruto a chance for apprenticeship under yours truly. You won't have him. Sakura's face panicked as she pushed Naruto behind her, already taking out her kunao. I won't let you take him away. She stood, ready to attack at the minimum provocation. He's my teammate. Mine. Not yours. Go and find yourself someone else to corrupt, you old perverted bastard. She was breathing raggedly, but Jiraiya simply sighed and brought both hands up in a sign of mock surrender. I said I offered him, he didn't accept. The girl's eyes narrowed on him, before asking confirmation from Naruto, who looked shocked, probably because the man scared him she'd have to defend him from that man, yes, and clearly not because she had a kunao in her hand. She had pilfered it from the nurse's pocket beforehand that would teach the woman never to leave her own weaponry unattended, and now it was hers. Just like Naruto and Sai were. Sakura? Please drop the kunao, Naruto said slowly. Really, there's no need. Alright, she exhaled slowly, putting the weapon back behind her hospital gown, slowly rolling a bit of fabric to hold it steady with chakra. So what do you want? She hissed at the Sunin venomously. You three and your sensei, Jiraiya said simply, will be my escort as we move around Konoha's borders. I've been told there is one among you who is able to easily send messages across long distances with ink. His eyes moved towards Sai, someone who would like to learn more about his family. His orbs hovered over Naruto, and finally, well, what do you like to do, miss? His gaze stilled on Sakura. Protect my team from old wonkers, she barked out. Perfect. He clapped his hands together. We'll make you a wonderful kunoichi. I don't trust you, she muttered. But then again, what does a Sunin need an escort for? There are rumors of a mercenary organization operating within other countries, he replied calmly. And since the latest news? He looked around the room for a moment, before finally whispering. We are in a state of silent war. Sakura's heart plummeted. Sai remained unfazed. Naruto frowned. A war is going to break out. Sakura's voice was quavering as she spoke. Where? Against who? It is apparent Orochimaru, Jiraiya remarked, has acquired Otogaku's services. He has attacked Takigaku and last seen passing through Kyuzagaku. If he keeps up the current direction, he will hit Omegaku by the end of the week. Where are we stationed, then? Sakura's voice was a low murmur as she spoke. We are heading straight towards Otogaku. Now the Sunin's voice was serious, gone was any trace of laughter or happiness. Without Orochimaru or the large bulk of his army, we will be able to get a glimpse at the state of the country and which key structures should be hit to cripple their production and morale. So that's why, Naruto whispered bitterly. That's why the Hokage asked me. Yep, Jiraiya nodded once. Listen, Naruto, let me handle the old man. You're centuries too young for even trying to outwit him, and the same can be said for me, he chuckled, but at least I have my good looks to carry me by. When are we to depart, Jiraiya-sama? Sakura asked then without hesitation. Will we have time for? Of course this won't be until you are all healthy once more, Jiraiya scoffed. I will be going alone to check on the Omegaku situation, and find a lead for the mercenary organization. Afterwards we will be gone for a good amount of time, most likely 6 to 7 months, but it could be more. So pack whatever you truly can't live without when the time comes, and be warned that we won't be always sleeping in an inn or whatnot. The Sunin turned thoughtful for a moment. And find out what your chakra affinity is and get a technique down before I come back. If you haven't by the time I have returned. He sighed, I will personally write you in my next smut book as Ukes of some hermaphrodite character. What? Sakura stuttered. What the hell is wrong with you? You pervert. She exclaimed. Hey. I'm not just a pervert like your friend there, he gestured towards Sai. Suddenly, he clapped his hands together and then spread his arms wide, as he brought his right hand to his chin and smiled while looking upwards with his eyes closed. His left arm went behind his back, as if to sustain it and push his chest upwards more. I am a super pervert. He roared then, the gallant Jiraiya. This is a hospital. A nurse suddenly entered the room, hissing at the white-haired man who recoiled as if struck. Keep your perversions out of here. Yeah. Sakura exclaimed, nodding towards the nurse. And sign my book, the nurse added afterwards, taking out an orange book entitled Ika Ika Nurse Mako's Hard Secret, Extra Kinky Edition. To say Sakura was fuming. It would be an understatement. Kabuto Yakushi was instead pleased, as he handed over the Uchiha eyes to his contact, Ryazetsu. The woman, a secret sleeper agent from the Kyuzagakuer Fruit Division, had entered the tournament under the pretenses of being a Takigakuer Kunoichi. She was supposed to be the carrier of the eyes of the Uchiha towards his master, Orochimaru. Secretly, the Otagakuer team had killed her two teammates to make sure she would deliver it efficiently and promptly. Without having to waste time staying behind their sensei, she would just have to slit the Jounin's throat during the night or stab him in the back and then be on her way. "Remember the payment," he said then, just to make sure she would recall what would happen if she were to leave with the eyes. "The box." "We have it," Kabuto replied calmly. There really was no need to wait for an answer from his master. If Orochimaru actually wanted something, he always acquired it. "And we will open it, unless those eyes reach their destination." The Umbu nodded, and then disappeared in a flicker a moment later. Her garb was that of a Suna Jounin, gently loaned from the upper echelon of the Suna army, who was now using Konoha supplies, leaving to return to their village and prepare in case a Megakuer was to fall. The truth was that they would serve as a shield for him, as he made his way with the samples acquired from the Uchiha towards the Kaze cage. At the same time, if the flower operative Shior had managed her own side of the deal, well, Itaka was going to love to the death his grandkids. Either way, Orochimaru-sama would have what he needed from both the fruit and the flower factions of Kyuzagakuer. He hadn't managed to acquire a Hyaga to deal with Kyumegakuer, but then again, there was always the contingency ready. The Sandaime exhaled slowly smoke in two big clouds, as he watched with tired eyes the map of the elemental countries. "Where will you strike next, my student?" the Sandaime whispered. "Just where?" "Hokage-sama." An Umbu appeared quickly, his appearance slightly rattled as he stood to attention. "We have begun to spread the pamphlets as ordered." "Very well," he replied calmly. "Keep the Umbu at the ready. They are to intercept her the moment she begins moving towards Konoha and send a message along the way." "Understood, sir," the Umbu replied, standing to attention as he disappeared to deliver the order. "So, Danzo," Hiruzen spoke then crisply. "What brings you here, now?" "I do not doubt your hearing has gone worse with the passing of time," the Yami of Shinobi remarked as he slowly appeared from the shadows. "Nor do I doubt your brains, old friend, but what you are doing is—" "Orochimaru would never expect for the morsel to end in his nest," the Sandaime replied. "I can bank on that and Jiraiya's protection." "Like you did for the exams?" "Where was the Uchiha's protection there? Weren't you the one with the deal?" The Hokage smiled then, thinly, with a steel-like smile. "Protection, in exchange for silence? Aren't you the one who failed him, considering where the eyes were lost?" Danzo's only eye narrowed for a moment. It was only that, and then Danzo laughed. He laughed as his face morphed into one of disgust. "You knew?" the Yami of Shinobi accused. "You knew from the very beginning." Danzo snarled. "You knew, and you did nothing. You had to suspect, you had to." The old Shinobi looked sideways then. "And you did this to discredit me?" There was a moment of silence. "You know where the other eyes went, then, if you'd rather have them taken." "That is a hefty assumption, Danzo," Hiruzen replied calmly as he slowly stood up. "Truly, a hefty assumption." It was a moment. There was a flash as Danzo's harness snapped. Tonto met Kunao, ripples of air countered rock shards the size of grains. The breathing grew quickened. Then Danzo's left eye socket burst apart in a shower of blood. The Yami of Shinobi recoiled, holding on to his bleeding side. Hiruzen's right hand was bleeding, clenching on an indisputable Sharingan orb that turned to poultice within the man's hands the next moment. Driblets of blood and eye fell on the carpet, as Hiruzen's breath slowly calmed down as the man straightened himself. "I hope my message has been clear, Danzo," the Sandaime said frostily. "I was willing to turn a blind eye, as long as you acted in favor of Konoha, but one genin is dead, another is in the hospital, both of our village. And if Naruto hadn't managed to overcome this, then there would also be a Wagakuer to fight against. Do you really wish for war?" Hiruzen exclaimed. "Where has my teammate gone, to be replaced by a psychopathic warhawk?" "You know nothing." Danzo roared back. "Your actions are once more guided by your heart. What do you think you are doing?" Do you expect this action to be without consequences? No, Hiruzen shook his head slowly. But if I hadn't acted now, you would have used that cursed eye on me, wouldn't you? I swore I would never. But a shinobi's promise is worth the medal of a kunao in the back, Hiruzen quipped back. How did you know which eye it was? You never asked for a transplant, Hiruzen smoothly remarked. You could have wobbled with both eyes, that you didn't, it meant you had something to hide beneath, like Kakashi's own. And what made you so certain it was me? He retorted once more. It could have been a spy. It could have been the boy himself. Oh, but Naruto was all but a bloodthirsty murderer when I met with him earlier. Hiruzen pointed his accusing bloody finger at Danzo. I saw behind his eyes, Danzo. What you did, what guilt he will live with, it is unforgivable. He trusted you. And so what now? Are you going to kill me, Hokage-sama? Danzo remarked dryly. No, the Sandaime shook his head. You are assigned to the front line, Danzo, as head of the military. You will recapture Takigakuer, Kyuzagakuer, and then march against Orochimaru, Hiruzen said calmly. I want to be clear, I do not kill you because you and your men are needed, but you are hardly essential. There was the hint of a smirk now, on the Sarutobi's face. Take all your able-bodied men and move to the front, now get out of my sight, Danzo. Danzo stood still for a moment more, before bowing to the Hokage and turning to leave. Tobirama-sensei was wrong to choose you as the Hokage back then, Danzo remarked as he walked towards the door, but in the end, you grew to fit the mantle. With his bleeding eye socket, the Yami of Shinobi left the Hokage's office. In that deafening silence, Hiruzen bitterly turned back to his seat, looking at the complete lack of devastation in his office. Even his Umbu had no idea what had just transpired, but then again, they were not old elderly men settled on their ways, forced to headbutt one another for supremacy every now and then. He didn't even wash the hand he had used to squash that cursed Sharingan. Some powers aren't meant for mortals, shinobi or not. I will protect Konoha from enemies within and without, Hiruzen whispered staring through the window at the still peaceful village. But I will believe in you one last time, my old friend, for as long as I draw breath. He closed his eyes. That is my duty. He took a deep, shuddering breath. My duty as Hokage. The fellow countrymen of Konoha make up each part of my body, those of the village believe in me, and I believe in them. That's what it means to be Hokage. But he would not be fooled again. Chapter 33, The Screams of Forgotten Memories. The Chiryunin flak jacket was a dark green. It held pouches for various equipment, going from tightly packed steel wires, bundles of shuriken, small fist-sized kunao and larger ones. The longer pouches contained rations and medical pills, as well as various bandages, gauzes and morphine shots in a ratio varying accordingly to the Chiryunin's classification as administrative, medical or field assigned. The Hokage handed over the flak jacket already packed, heavy as it was, to the recently minted Chiryunin. Usually, during the ceremony, the Hokage would say something and the Chiryunin would then reply with a pledge of loyalty towards Konoha. There was nothing else to say afterwards. Once a shinobi became a Chiryunin, the mission assignment desk would assign C ranks and B ranks upon request, but only to a group of 4 of said rank. Unless a Jounin was present, no group beneath 4 members could partake in any mission of B rank. The Shinobi Bureau also assigned new, wider apartments in the shinobi blocks to the Chiryunin who needed them, generally closer to the administrative buildings or the medical hospital of Konoha. Those didn't come packed with food however. The Hokage smiled warmly as the 3 new Chiryunin of Konoha strode in purposefully, their vests hiding their underneath clothes for the most part. Naruto had a black shirt, his hair once more raven and spiky. Sakura's own shirt was a deep crimson red, striped with black and dark orange like the stripes of a tiger. Sai's clothing was unchanged. Very well, the Sandaime said as he nodded to Irika Umino, sitting at his left. As Chiryunin of Konohagakuer, you will now begin elemental chakra training. For that to happen, we must first find out what your affinity is. The Chiryunin slowly stood, taking 3 pieces of paper from the desk he was sitting at. He handed them over, one at the time, to the new Chiryunin. The paper is chakra sensitive. After you have sent chakra into it, it will split if your nature is wind, burn if it is fire, become soggy if it's water, crumble if it's earth and crackle if it's lightning. As soon as Iruka finished explaining, there was a small barely audible snap from Naruto's chakra paper, revealing wind. Sai's own burned, but he already knew what his affinity was after all. Sakura's paper Komu stead too, startling the pink-haired girl who dropped it. Fire nature, 2 out of 3, Iruka remarked. And, wind nature? It's extremely rare in Konoha, the Chiryunin said slowly. Well, guess your teammates are lucky to have you in the team, Naruto, the man said then with a slightly strained smile. Try not to burn half the village while practicing together. Sakura sported a tick mark. What's that supposed to mean, huh? Fire and wind naturally help each other, the man remarked, not rising to the bait. Techniques that use both together are stronger, and Konoha has long kept up its tradition as the fire country's village by producing quite a rate of fire affinity shinobi, and quite few wind affinity ones. Tsunagakuer is the exact opposite, and that is also one of the reasons we are allied with them. The Gokakyu no Jutsu is the standard fire release we have all Chiryunin learn, Hiruzen spoke then, carefully penning a document. For wind instead, we have the Shinka Renpa. He wrote down another document. Head towards the library and deliver these to the librarian. Remember that no technique may leave the library at any one moment, and if found in possession of a technique scroll outside of it, the penalty is imprisonment for at least 5 months. Iruka grabbed the scrolls, before offering them one at the time to the Chiryunin. 2 of them had a red seal to keep them closed, while the third had a light bluish one. Very well, the Sandaime said then. You are dismissed. Hokage-sama, the 3 Chiryunin stood to attention as one, before slowly turning and leaving. Naruto's thoughts on what it meant to be a wind affinity shinobi halted as he found himself bumping together with his team against another one. The team was made of Shikamaru, Choji and Ami. Their Jounin sensei was the bearded son of the Hokage Asuma Sarutobi, if Naruto remembered correctly, and he held a cigarette in his mouth as he walked behind his own team. Well, the Jounin was the first to break the silence. I suppose congratulations are in order, then. Thank you, Sakura properly replied with a light bow. Her eyes then moved towards Ami, a questioning look passing over her features. Exams are a fraud, Shikamaru drawled out slowly. It's the sort of polite thing all villages know and no village speak of. Indeed, Asuma huffed. Well, we are late for a mission. The bearded Jounin rolled his eyes as he gestured to his team to move, but it was only with reluctance that Ami actually began to walk away. The fact she gave one last look at Sakura's jacket with envy, before smirking at the sight of Sai and Naruto, sent chills down Sakura's back. Naruto-kun. Ami's voice was sultry as she slowly came to a halt. Can I ask you a question? Oh, yes. What does it feel like, to be a bloodthirsty monster? Naruto's eyes widened briefly, before the chiding Ami came out of Asuma's mouth. Sakura clenched her fists. What? Sensei. He was laughing when he did that to poor Tenten-san, all that gouging and ripping, shouldn't he be leashed somewhere? Ami, Shikamaru said slowly. You don't want to keep talking. Why not? I mean, shouldn't he be kept in a cage for all that he did? Isn't he dangerous? Sakura's teeth were grounding one against the other. She wasn't going to hit her. She could kill her though, couldn't she? She would slowly open her mouth and bring her teeth near the girl's neckline, and then she would rip off her neck and proceed to tear her head apart. Yes, she could do that. Or she could make it simpler and less messy. Naruto probably wouldn't like all that blood. She would just have to throw a kunai at her neck one night, while the girl went back home. The whore would bleed out in an instant in the back of a dirty alley, and maybe the rats would feast on her body. She smiled gingerly at the thought. Exactly because he's dangerous, Shikamaru replied calmly. Do you really want him angry at you? Ami huffed and crossed her arms over her chest, giving one last look at Sakura's team. Well, all right. It's not like his teammates are any better. What's up with that one anyway? Does he have a facial cramp or something? Although I suppose it is better than being scarred for life to look like a Halloween monster. Sakura flinched as her hand went to her neck wound, before she began to show her teeth in a slight growling noise. Sai moved his head to the side for a moment, locking eyes with Ami without saying a single word. He just gazed at her. The boy then took a single step forward and brought his right hand up to his chin. There was silence once more. What? Ami stuttered out. What is it? Sai said nothing. Creepy. He slowly whispered. She thinks she is alive, dickless. What? Of course I'm alive. Ami screeched. I didn't die back there, did I? She thinks she's alive, Sai murmured again. Suddenly, his right hand shot forth, passing through the girl's chest as if it wasn't there. You're a ghost, girl, he deadpanned. Go on, towards the light, he added then. You are dead. A light appeared just behind Sai, illuminating everyone in a thin ethereal blanket of light blue. I'm not dead. Ami screamed with her skin pale, running away from the light and down the corridor. Asuma raised his right eyebrow slowly, looking at Sai. Kurane taught you, didn't she? Indeed, Sai said, the genjutsu used to scare away the brat calmly dispelled. Well, at least there wasn't any bloodshed. Chuji kept on munching quietly, before slowly starting to walk towards the same direction Ami had taken. Shikamaru sighed, and soon followed too. Asuma remained there for a moment more, before finally crossing his arms over his chest and smiling wistfully. I'm sorry for them, he said. They're still kids in the end. Of course, Sakura gritted out, a venomous smile on her face. Of course, she nodded. Have you already been told of the passcodes to access the Chiryunin lounge? Yes, Sakura nodded once more with a thin smile. It's on the 3rd floor of the tower, right? Exactly, Asuma nodded. Pass by the lounge sometime tonight, they're winging up a welcome party for you. Really? Naruto asked, slightly perplexed. Chiryunin are what form the bulk of Konoha's shinobi, Asuma shrugged. You will probably remain a Chiryunin for years, better to become friends than enemies with them, since you will eventually end up taking missions with other Chiryunin rather than your team. Sakura's eyes now looked downcast, as if a thin veil of misery had settled on her. Anyway, good luck with the librarian, Asuma nodded towards them as a goodbye, before heading off towards his genin. The 3 Chiryunin left the tower then, Sakura huffing with her arms crossed over her chest and huffing. Really, the nerves of that girl, she mumbled before letting her arms fall limply to her sides. That was plain mean. Plain stupid, Sai nodded. Wasn't she right, though? Naruto's question met with the sharp sound of a slap. Sakura's hand throbbed as the girl eyed him murderously. Say it again, I dare you, she hissed at him. Well. Naruto remained quiet. Good, Sakura huffed. What are your cheeks made of anyway? She moved her offending hand up and down, as if to cool it off. You're no more of a monster than we are, Naruto. I don't know what they all have against you anyway, she muttered. I should watch the recordings of the fights. Naruto just winced at that. Oh, come on, Sakura sighed. It won't change my opinion of you, Naruto, can't you trust me on this? You shouldn't watch it alone, Sai quipped then. You are probably going to wet yourself. I'm not afraid of watching him fight, and you'll be panting and sweating and Shan narrow. Sai was plunged deep in the ground, where he laid twitching for a moment. Sakura suddenly began to cough, bringing both her hands to her mouth as she felt Naruto's hand placed against her back, as he held her steady. The coughs soon subsided, letting the pink-haired Kunoichi watch her hands with slightly watery eyes. She breathed once, to recollect herself, before standing back up as if nothing had happened. Sakura then huffed, pervert, double pervert, she muttered. I'll have to keep you on a short leash when we go with that super pervert, she growled. I don't want to think what you can become unattended. The library came into view a few minutes afterwards, a sign outside announcing the recordings of the Chiryunin exams were available since a few days before with their stay in the hospital. It wasn't much of a surprise they had already begun sharing them. The librarian aide was an old woman with buns held together by hairpins, wearing a long flowing robe. Oh, new Chiryunin, right. She looked them up and down for a moment, before finally nodding. Go to the Chiryunin section, and ask for Mito Kato Homura. Hand over the permission scrolls to him and he'll take care of it. She gestured towards a hallway further down the way, standing slightly hidden from view due to a couple of shelves placed at an angle to ensure nobody from the entrance of the library could see the passage. Sakura hesitated as she slowly took a step forward. I'd like a copy of the Chiryunin matches. The old woman raised an eyebrow at that. Of course, she perused through a metallic drawer for a while, before taking out what looked like a thick bundle of cloth. The tape is to be returned by the end of the week. Thank you, ma'am, Sakura nodded, before returning to her team and following them through the half-hidden passage towards the Chiryunin section. In there, another counter was set in the far end of a slightly circular room, where bunches of Chiryunin were hovering over piles of papers of various types and forms, muttering to themselves. They passed by without even a glance in their direction until they reached the old man who had a pair of thick-rimmed glasses on his nose. The old shinobi had a scroll hanging loosely around his neck, with scribbles implying they could summon things forth, or at least that much was what Naruto saw at a glance. Yes. My Tokado-san? Sakura asked, bringing up her own scroll. Ah, the man remarked calmly with a knowing look. 3 fire techniques. I'm Wind, Naruto said handing over his scroll, just as Sai gently left his on the counter. Very well, Homura nodded. He eyed Naruto for a moment more, before asking. You are unlucky, he sighed. To think Danzo is a wind user and has been assigned to the war front, a pity, the old man shook his head slightly. You know Danzo-sensei? Oh? Right, I was one of his teammates during the war, that's how we know each other. He spoke fondly of you. Naruto wearily eyed the old man with a slight amount of distrust, before settling for an awkward smile. Ah, is that it? I see, I couldn't find him and I thought he... Oh, don't worry, Homura shrugged, he's tough and cranky, the enemy nin won't even manage to scratch him. The old shinobi grabbed 3 scrolls, 2 of which were identical with their back red, while the third one had a light cerulean color to it. Here you go, remember, you can't leave the room with the scrolls. Taking notes is fine, but they too cannot be brought outside. There was an understanding nod from the 3 Chiryunin then, as they grabbed their assigned scroll and went to sit down at a free table. Sakura was the first to open the scroll and start reading, soon followed by Sai. Naruto fidgeted for a bit, before finally giving in to pressure and doing the same thing. I could teach you that, the Kyuubi's voice suddenly assaulted his ears, making him jump slightly on his chair. I could teach you about sealing, about fire techniques, about wind techniques, I could teach you everything you desire. He closed his eyes for a moment, mouthing to himself a simple shut up. As you wish, Kurama merely replied with a smirk, his tails swishing in the giant cage. There was a moment of silence, before Naruto began to grumble. Ah. He closed his eyes for a moment, and then opened them again to the pages. The words still looked alien to him, as if they were in another tongue. The fact that Sakura was simply nodding to herself, playing with a lock of her hair as if it was something extremely understandable, and Sai was acting impassively as always, it just made him feel unfit. He was a Chiryunin, but what did that mean? Did that make him suddenly powerful? Was his rank something he had acquired through his skills or something the Kyuubi had given to him? Would he have won against Kurotsuki on his own strength, or against Tenten? Would he have managed to win through all 3 of his opponents anyway, without the 9-tailed fox intervening? What was he, in the end, without the fox? Was he still Naruto? He didn't know the answer to that question. His life without the fox would probably be easier, but then again that would mean that someone else would have to shoulder said burden. What if, what Sai or Sakura had ended up with the Kyuubi? What if the fox hadn't left his mother to begin with? He'd still have his parents, wouldn't he? He'd be loved. He wouldn't be settled with a team of dysfunctional individuals in which he was the most damaged, at least in his opinion. An hour's easily passed, before he was startled out of his thoughts by a voice familiar to him. Naruto. Sakura's voice was low as she spoke. Is there something you don't understand? Softly, he nodded his head back. Well, the pink-haired girl said calmly. What's the problem? He frowned, before pointing at the first few lines of the scroll. What does, brachial equivalent of an intraperpendicular jab followed by pharyngeal exhalation of chakra-needed streams through multiple division and separation of wind spinning encounter? Ah, Sakura said, slowly scuttling closer. It means you have to hold your hand in front of your mouth, as if ready to stab it forward, while at the same time you must exhale from your throat chakra. The chakra must be divided into various shapes, she was softly whispering, and close as she was Naruto could even smell her light perfume of, was it vanilla with an undertone of copper? While you must take the single streams of chakra and make them spin one against the other, she finished softly, before her eyes emerald orbs that they were settled on his. They looked at one another in silence for a moment, the quiet breathing as they gazed into each other's face uninterrupted. Sakura slowly brought one of her locks behind her ear, biting on her lower lip as she seemed to be inwardly struggling about something. No orgies in the library. Sai broke the moment. Sakura's forehead sported a giant tick mark. Naruto exhaled a breath he didn't know he was holding, as he moved back and back to his scroll. So basically, he just had to make the chakra in his throat do some sort of spinning motion like with the raised non. But one against the other. The scroll was telling him to create two streams of chakra inside his body, have them conflict and then have them meld into a single jutsu then expelled from the mouth. Sigh. Sakura snarled slightly, "Can you step outside with me a moment?" Sai complied, and Naruto from his spot could distinctively hear the sound of the ground trembling as if someone was repeatedly punching someone else against the ground. Sakura returned with a droplet of blood against her chin, which she simply swept away with her right finger before licking it off. Sai's gone home for today, she smiled then. A positively twitchy smile that seemed to give a completely different story than what she was telling. "Did you call a medic nin for him?" Naruto asked carefully. Sakura blushed lightly. "I never really hit him that strongly," she fidgeted with her fingers for a moment. "I'm not a violent person." Naruto tried to keep an impassible face, but there was a slight twitch at the side of his face, which soon became a snort as the boy tried to hold in a chuckle. He shook his head with his lips twitching up in a smile, as he sighed in resignation and defeat. "Should we go somewhere, you and me?" he asked then. "Like on a date." Sakura stammered out, blushing even more. Naruto frowned. "We should talk about this outside, yes." He stood, rolling up his scroll and handing it back to Homura, who took it without as much as a second thought. Sakura followed him with both her scroll and that of Sai, coming out of the library a few minutes later with her hands holding onto the tape. "Do you have a tape recorder at home?" he asked her, slowly. She nodded, hesitantly. "Why yeah, why? You want to? We can watch that," he tapped on the tournament video. "And then you can decide." "Naruto, nothing that I will find in there will. Just do it for me, all right?" He sighed. "Please." She relented. Nodding once, she began to walk towards her house, with Naruto following her this time around. She felt somewhat anxious. Her parents hadn't yet come back from Odafukugai, and that meant she had taken care of the house in their absence. What if he ended up in her room and saw the way she had left the bed sheets? Or the dirty clothes in the laundry? Suddenly, she realized Naruto was going to enter her house. She was going to let her packmate see her cave. It was normal. She just had to breathe and remember that it was normal for packs to go around together and sleep in the cave together to stave off the cold. It was normal. Everything was going to be normal. There they were, the porch was tidy and neat, perfect. She opened the door and gestured for him to come inside. Welcome," she stammered out. "Thank you," he softly whispered. She moved towards the living room, where the only tape recorder was in the house. She would have died of embarrassment if it had been up in her room. "Do you want something to drink?" she asked as she gestured for him to sit on the sofa. "There's water and milk. I could put up some tea if you like." "Sakura," Naruto murmured, "just put the tape on and sit down." She hastily did so, taking her seat slightly distanced on the other extremity of the sofa. The television soon turned on, and as it began to whir and click, the images appeared a second later. "Welcome to the broadcast of the Chunin tournament, held in Konohagakure no Sato." The voice of the announcer spoke clearly, just as there was a cut to the tournament grounds where Naruto could see himself standing in line. His eyes fixed on Tenten's form. The girl was smiling. She was waving her hand at the crowd and laughing, every now and then giving a small shoulder bump to her teammates to make them do the same. She looked every bit as happy as he did normally when he was hanging out with his own teammates. She was an orphan as he was. She didn't have the Kyuubi in her stomach, she didn't have anything special, and held no fault but having placed a trap that Sakura hadn't dodged. Why had he believed avenging such a wound meant killing that girl? Show no mercy. Why? Why did he have to show no mercy? Why did he have to listen to Danzo-sensei's words? Clearly, the man hadn't really meant for him to kill her, had he? The commenter saw the arrival of Sakura as surprisingly characteristic, before moving on to the first match that Sakura watched dispassionately. I couldn't let him hurt you or Sai, she whispered softly from her corner of the sofa. Her arms clasped around her knees as she was sitting crouched. He was strong, really strong, and I know I could never beat him no matter how hard I trained, so I just had to bet everything on that move. I knew it would hurt afterwards, I knew it, but pain is a constant thing in the shinobi world. Naruto remained quiet as the next match began. He had just a fuzzy recollection of what he had actually done with his body, as he wasn't actually fighting Tenten as much as fighting both the Kyuubi and his dark self. His body covered in red chakra with two tails swishing behind him, his entire appearance looked feral and demonic as he charged and literally won within the first minutes of the match. The Jinhiriki of Konohagaku no Sato. Naruto Uzumaki. With complete control over his demon, he is the youngest host of the Jinhiriki, and, I think I'm going to feel sick. The commenter wasn't the only one feeling sick. Naruto was too. He watched as his past self tore apart the girl's lower limbs, her spine, her chest, her ribs, her organs. He watched him do all of that and keep her alive screaming. It was. He heard the sound of Sakura running out of the room, heading upstairs. Sighing, Naruto stopped the tape from going further and stood up. He moved towards the hallway, just in time to hear Sakura starting to retch in the bathroom. He clenched his fists. Wasn't this proof enough? Weapons aren't supposed to have anything, the Kyuubi remarked dryly. Your mother was pretty clear on that. Oh, she was. Did you know that in her mind, I couldn't even stretch my legs or play shogi? I was forced to remain tied to a circular table, with chains daily digging into my own body, and she took from my chakra whenever she had a need for it, the fox growled. Just leave, and forget this day ever happened, it will be better for both of you. Nobody wants you, Naruto, they only want me in the end. He shook his head. He wasn't going to listen to the Kyuubi, not yet. He heard Sakura retch one more time, and because of that, he turned and left. If his very presence made the girl vomit, then why was he still insisting? He wasn't supposed to even try. There were regulations in place. There were laws to be followed. As he dashed out and began to run away, heading towards his apartment, he felt the sting of treacherous tears in the corner of his eyes. He wiped them away quickly. That day, that specific day, hadn't happened. It had never happened. Sakura was retching against the toilet seat. Images assaulted her mind, not of Naruto tearing apart Tenten, no, but of carcasses. Animal carcasses she ate raw to survive. Their glassy eyes, their dead faces on the ground, she had been forced to shadow a tiger pack. She remembered their pungent smells. She recalled the fear of failing at any moment and dying. If she didn't shadow them, if she didn't follow them, then the whore would sweep down from her hiding spot and attack her. She'd break a bone. She'd snap a limb. She'd cut a piece of cloth. She'd punch her. She'd make her eat dirt, hallucinogenic fungi, and things. She had to follow the tigers, to act like them. She had to keep up with their strides, with their movements. She had to be wary of the biggest one, the alpha. She had to eat their prey's remains. The people who had died and remained behind, the ones belonging to old and past Chunin exams taken in the forest, the tigers had eaten them already, but she found their tools old and rusty and pieces of fabric she could use to stem the blood from the animals of the forest. Lucky strikes at her. If she didn't fight for survival, she would die. If she didn't fight for supremacy, she would die. It was the law of the jungle, of the might is right and of power, and it disgusted her. She retched once more, her eyes closed as tears kept on falling down her face. She was a disgusting monster. She had been so hungry, the cub had been out there alone. He had meat on his bones. So what did it matter to a tiger mother, if she went and ate a bit of the child? Nothing. She had been careless, the tiger, and she had paid. The price for being careless is death. The price for believing the world is happy is death. The price for thinking the world has only nice things? It is death. The price for failure? Death or pain? The price for success? Food. It was warm food, succulent to eat when hungry, which sizzles when the fat burns on the open fire, which can also let out droplets of blood that can be drunk warm to soothe your throat. She puked one last time, before letting out a shuddering breath. She couldn't fall asleep there, with no one standing guard. She needed to be somewhere safe. She needed to be with someone she trusted. She stumbled back up groggily, slamming open the door as she rolled down the stairs, hitting her head against the wooden planks and feeling the skin crack as blood began to dribble down her forehead. It didn't matter. She opened the door and stepped outside. She needed someone, anyone. Sasuke was not a choice. Naruto had run away. No, he hadn't. He just was somewhere else, wasn't he? No, he had run away. Naruto had run away from her. She had to find her sensei. She was the pack leader, right? She would know what to do, wouldn't she? Yojiro Izuki had been patiently waiting in her house for Hayate to come back from whatever mission the Hokage had assigned him within the village. Short of guarding the gates, he should have been home within a few minutes at most. A rapid set of knocks suddenly assaulted her door, as her hearing caught the added sound of sniffles and choked cries, mixed with the word sensei. Yojiro opened the door slowly first, but when she realized there wasn't a genjutsu and it really was Sakura crying in front of her door, she had no choice but to let her in. The girl stumbled forward, her forehead bleeding, before ending up held by Yojiro's arms. Sakura. She blurted out between racked sobs and tears. He left. She actually wailed that aloud. Who? Yojiro said, suddenly on the alert. Who left? To go where? And Naruto? We watched the Chunin exams and then he left. I don't know what to do and... Sakura, Yojiro said calmly. Breathe. The pink-haired Kunoichi did so, just as the Exumbu began to think. If the genin had tried to run away from Konoha, then after knocking out his teammate he would have gone towards the safest place for him. Kiri had just finished its revolution after all, and then there was Kumigakuer or Uegakuer. Her blood ran cold. In Umbu, turning traitor meant a death sentence. It didn't matter when you were found, you would be killed the moment you were recognized. She had a job to do however, and the crying wreck of her student didn't help her much. Where did he go? Did he tell you? She asked then. No. Sakura was trembling as she spoke. I'm alone, he left me alone, like the forest, there was, hadn't Inoichi said something about this? The blood end. Sakura. Stay with me. Stick her to the present, that was what Inoichi had said to do. Do you know if he is going to betray Konoha? What? Sakura's voice lowered itself to a low murmur. Why would he do that? Yojiro's heart stilled for a second. There was a heartbeat of silence. Isn't Naruto trying to leave Konoha? No. The girl shook her head firmly. He left my house without telling me. So. Yojiro suddenly felt the need to slam her head against the nearest wall. He is not going to become rogue. Naruto would never do that. Sakura croaked out, her throat sore already from the crying. He'd never do that, she whispered once more. So you are crying because he was rude and left without saying goodbye. Her voice was pitiful as her eyes went down to her fingers. He was gone, she weakly said. I don't like it when he's gone. I see, Yojiro exhaled, putting her right hand over the girl's shoulder. What did one do with a student who had a crush? Oh, right. Then, why didn't you follow him? Because I don't know where he lives, sensei, she whispered. I do, Yojiro replied firmly. Now however. Her eyes steeled themselves. Sakura. This is unacceptable behavior. The girl stiffened to attention, her back ramrod straight. You are a kunoichi. You do not sniffle or sob because a man left you without saying goodbye. Act like a shinobi, and if he leaves, then chase after him. Yojeo exclaimed firmly. Now go out there, find your teammate and talk with him calmly before asking why he left, Hate Gecko remarked dryly as he entered from the doorway. Really, Yojeo, you find the most interesting ways of making my life interesting, the man coughed slightly, shaking his head. Patch her before she leaves and bleeds out along the way, he pointed out as he stepped past Sakura to give a quick kiss on the cheek to Yojeo. Yojeo just looked at Hate for a moment, before turning her gaze back on Sakura and nodding firmly. Precisely, now come here and let's get you cleaned, you look a mess. I'm sorry, sensei, Sakura sniffled one last time, before a murderous glare from Yojeo made her shut up completely. Don't be, she replied calmly if with a bit of frost in her voice. I actually expected something like this to happen, but not at this time of the day. The glare was enough to keep Sakura silent through her sensei's treatment. With a bandage on her forehead, the green-eyed kunoichi left after bowing profusely to her teacher. At the same time, atop the Yondame's head, Naruto was nervously taking out from beneath the secret cache the kunao of his father, as well as preparing a plan to empty the cemetery of a particular tomb. If he ended up in the middle of the war, then he might never get another chance, and whatever supplies his father had, they'd serve him better now than later. He'd have to apologize to Sakura, but he had warned her. He had told her not to watch, but now she was disgusted with him as everyone else. Only Sai, the Sandame, the super pervert and sensei remained who weren't disgusted with him, and even then, for how long? He had no one who he could truly trust, did he? If even Sakura retched from seeing him, then what hope did he have? None. And in that pit of misery, in that dark and deep pit of darkness, the Kyuubi grinned and flicked its tails. You must fill that void with love, the Kyuubi mocked the voice near him, really? Well, then it comes to term that misery and hatred stretches it, right? You are a despicable abomination, the voice replied angrily. He offered you an ear, and this is how you repay him. You atrocious monster. So spoke the jailer, the executioner, and the tyrant, the Kyuubi replied while yawning. I'm enjoying this. Aren't you? Never, the voice spat out. Now, Kurama rolled his eyes. Mito-chan, you shouldn't act this way, it makes your skin wrinkle. The Kyuubi laughed then, his voice reverberating across the empty halls. Everything was going right. For once, maybe, he'd finally have his chance at revenge. Chapter 34, The Wrathful Tragedy of Deceit and Lies. The cemetery of Konoha was silent, so late at night. There were no fences or chiyunin guarding the tombs since there really was nothing worthy of stealing and because making noise would probably attract someone anyway. If someone were to find him then, he'd have the excuse ready, he was reminiscing Aoba-sensei. In the dark, the only lights available came from the big monument tucked away in a corner that represented the will of fire, a giant flame made of stone that held the symbol of Konohagaku no Sato at its center. Beneath it, the names showed of those who had died during the war, giving their life for Konoha. It was redundant to the smaller monument in Training Ground 7, but then again he didn't even know who had commissioned that one built there. Now, he just had to find the tomb. Rin was not a common name. He doubted it would be easy to find her, even when knowing she had been a genin underneath the Yondaime. His eyes settled on a set of tombs Kakashi usually visited, before shrugging and deciding that if he had to start examining tombs, he'd start with those ones. He was right. The first tomb belonged to a certain Obito Uchiha, who had apparently died during the Third Shinobi War. His eyes moved further down, looking towards the tomb at his right. He squinted his eyes to make sure the name was right, Rin Nohara, and once he was sure he slowly began to move his hands across the tombstone. There had to be a switch of sorts, a hole, or something to place the Hiraishin Kunao. He found nothing. Was there a seal? He slowly took out the heavy three-pronged kunao from his flak jacket, carefully moving it in front and behind the tombstone. Was something supposed to happen? He exhaled slowly. He really would have to dig his way through it. Digging without tools was not difficult. Any shinobi worth his salt knew to send small amounts of chakra to his fingers, and then use them to dig through the dirt. He had used the same principle when fighting against Rock Lee after all, and a good shinobi always covered the hole behind him as he dug. The painful way of doing it required the usage of 2 hand seals, the correct knowledge of the substitution technique and the nerves to swallow down dirt. The problem was that he didn't know how deep the cache was, and if he tried to substitute himself with it, it wouldn't do. Substitution required preparing an object by coating it in chakra. Chakra had a natural tendency of returning to its origin, making it easier to substitute by having the chakra link up with the other prepared object and then swap at the fastest speed possible. The opposite was also true. Escaping from Rock Lee's clutches had required him to substitute with a bunshin, which was nothing more than chakra after all. But the object had to be made of a single element. It had to be a bag of earth or a tree trunk. It couldn't be a bit of one and a bit of the other. Chakra wouldn't coat in the same way organic and inorganic matter, and in the best case scenario the technique would fail. He would have to dig his way through. He once more looked carefully around, and once he realized there was no one watching over him, he began to dig. It took him 2 minutes to dig himself beneath the ground, while leaving just a slight sheen of perturbed dirt above him. Carefully keeping his breathing low, his right hand finally stopped clawing the dirt as it touched something hard and metallic. The problem now was opening the coffin, if it actually was a coffin. This was supposed to be a military cache, difficult to find but easy to access once that happened. He gritted his teeth as he looked for a fissure to open the coffin. Anything that could work similarly to it would be fine too. His fingers finally found what he was looking for, and with a feeling of elation, he moved the heavy kunai to the side of the metallic coffin. There was a light click as a metal panel in the center of the coffin gave way, precisely beneath Naruto's chest to keep the dirt out. He had to admit his father was an ingenious bastard in that way. Someone digging from above while trying to appear inconspicuous would not betray his position by forming a natural dwelling in the ground. He couldn't actually see what was in there, since it was dark being beneath the ground and all, but he could move his free hand inside and slowly start to touch the objects within. His fingers touched metal, pointed tips that belonged to barbed kunai and caltrops, blades made of chakra metal judging by how he could feel his chakra move easily through their surface, and finally, a few scrolls. He gritted his teeth as he grabbed them, deciding to check on what was inside once he was out of there. 3 scrolls came out from within the metal basket. One had to be the Hiration, but the other 2, maybe the Raisnon could be an option? If so. He wondered what the 3rd scroll was about, what techniques it could hold, maybe seals, judging by how the Yondaime had managed to keep the Kyuubi at bay. He grumbled as he quickly put the 3 scrolls inside his flak jacket's pouches, before pushing once more with the 3-pronged kunai the switch and closing the casket. Slowly turning around on himself, he began to dig his way out. He emerged from the dirt to the night sky, before slowly getting to his feet and pressing back the dirt. He cleaned himself as much as he could with his hands, and then began to run away. He had gotten what he had come to get. Naruto reached his apartment room without being interrupted, which wasn't much of a strange thing anyway. Quite a number of shinobi usually returned home late, covered in dirt, after having exhausted themselves training and having fallen asleep on the training grounds. Not even the few umbu he crossed along his path gave him more than a quick glance. A few actually waved at him, probably the same he used to wave at when he still lived in his old apartment. It was as he softly landed in front of his door that he realized there was a form standing crouched against it. Sakura was there, asleep, and with her arms around her legs and her head low. She sported a patch of cotton held with gauze on her forehead, and she was still wearing her Chiryunin jacket even though there were some small red stains on the side of it. Why was she there to begin with? He swallowed nervously as he looked around. He could enter from the window, but if he did that, then he'd be leaving her outside in the cold, and he didn't want that. He gently lowered himself next to the girl, before whispering. "Hey." Sakura moaned, but remained quiet. "Hey." Naruto said once more. Sakura's moan became slightly louder, as she seemed to shift on her position. "Sakura," he said in a murmur. "5 minutes, Mom," she whispered in her small voice. "Just 5, Naruto." "Sakura," Naruto coughed slightly. "I can't open the door with you here." "Door?" "Ah." Her croaking voice signaled she was completely awake, as she was startled so much she jumped back on her feet and against the guardrail on the other side of the outside corridor. Every apartment complex built had the stairs outside, so that one could simply jump in front of his door from the roofs. "Naruto," she whispered, looking at him for a moment more. "Naruto." And then she hugged him. Naruto actually groaned from the pressure, as the girl seemed keener on snapping his spine in half than actually hugging him. Her hands grabbed at his back like claws, as she kept on pulling him closer as if afraid he'd make a run for it. "Naruto," she whispered once more, this time with a contented sound. Naruto exhaled slowly, his eyes wide in disbelief. He didn't understand what Sakura was doing, or why she was doing it. "Sakura? Why? Why?" she whispered, slowly separating from him, albeit with reluctance. "Why did you leave?" Both of Naruto's eyebrows rose up in shock. But you were disgusted with what you saw. I mean, you went upstairs and..." As he stammered that out, Sakura moved her head to the side in perplexity. I wasn't," she whispered back softly. I remembered something else which was worse." She shuddered, and instead of hugging herself, she pulled Naruto into a bone-crunching hug once more. "It was scary, what I remembered was scary." Sakura. Naruto hesitated, as he really didn't know what to do. "Do you want to come in?" he finally whispered. She hummed what was probably an affirmative reply, as she let her head drop against his shoulder. "Carry me," she giggled. That was creepy." "Sakura." He was bewildered by her question, especially when she simply linked her arms against his neck and deftly circled around him, ending up on his back with her legs firmly crossed in front of him. What are you doing?" "Carry me," she whined now, as if she was a child. "It's late, and I'm tired." She yawned then, nuzzling the back of his neck with her nose, which just sent Naruto to shudder and stand ramrod straight from surprise. He sighed in defeat as he slowly took out the key to his apartment, opening it and taking firm steps inside. Sakura didn't seem to want to let go even once he closed the door behind him. "Do you want to talk?" "Sleepy," she murmured. "Sleep? You can't sleep on my back," he retorted. The door closed, he turned to look at his new apartment. It still had a few boxes to place inside his personal effects, but for the rest, it came already furnished. The Chiryunin rank had quite the bit of benefits concerning the house. It no longer was a one-room apartment, but held multiple areas. There was a kitchenette in the corner of the room, but there also was a television and a couple of chairs on the other side, complete with a sofa and a carpet. The apartment had a private bathroom with a shower, a sleeping room and a cramped office room. The sofa could double as a guest bed in a pinch, and there actually was the chance to swap the office room with a child's one, in case of Chiryunin couples. He sighed as he slowly stumbled his way towards his bed. He'd drop Sakura there and he'd take the sofa. "Earthy," Sakura muttered as Naruto shivered once more. Why was she nuzzling the side of his neck now? "Burrow." "My neck isn't a burrow, Sakura," Naruto said with a slight nervous chuckle. "Wouldn't you prefer a bed?" "Burrow," she mumbled firmly, increasing her hold over his flak jacket. There really wasn't a choice, was there? With a sigh, he slowly sat on the edge of the bed and unclasped his Chiryunin vest, letting Sakura gently fall down while the girl still hugged it. He swiftly removed the 3 scrolls he had pilfered from the cemetery from the pockets, and then slowly tiptoed out of the room and towards the office. He'd have a look at the scrolls before anything else. The office had a desk and a chair, as well as a small overhanging light bulb and a shelf encased in the wall. Quietly, he unclasped the scrolls and read the title of the techniques. As he had guessed, one was the Hiration and the other was the Raise Non. It was the third one that stumped him. "Shishofun," he whispered. The 4 symbols seal was a Fuinjutsu technique that belonged to the Uzumaki clan. Believing the scroll anything ranging from giants to evil spirits, passing by objects and living beings, could be sealed inside one of these to be released once the appropriate key was given. In fact, creating a key was a core element of the technique itself. The technique was extremely dangerous and worth destroying an entire country for it. It didn't matter who you were, it didn't matter how strong you could be, It didn't even matter what army you had at your command, when this seal was executed, it consumed. It devoured. It engulfed, and it trapped. Once written, it took chakra to initiate it of course, but after that, itself completed itself. There were no words to describe it properly. People would kill for that more than they would for the high ration. One brush stroke was all that it took, and a mountain was gone forever. Scribbling chakra-infused ink on a parchment was all that the user needed to trap an enemy shinobi. Skirmishes became literal games of tag, rather than actual fights. Of course, there was a need for a strong vessel to hold the being in question if it was a living creature that was sealed. Something about the natural destabilizing chakra effects on seals forced the vessel to deteriorate with time. The more chakra ran through it that was foreign, and in some cases the usage was. You. Naruto growled. You damn, motherfucking, bastard. There was silence in the office as chakra began to ripple around Naruto's frame. You don't get to ignore me now, you sack of shit, he cussed. You whoreson of a whorish bastard, you treacherous hellish spawn of hell, answer me. He growled. I always loathed Minato's contingency planning, the fox remarked calmly. I truly think I am starting to hate your father more than I hate your ancestor. Using your chakra shortens my life, Naruto hissed. When were you planning on telling me this? Huh. Never, of course, the Kyuubi replied. No need hiding it, it was in plain air now after all. How many years? Naruto whispered. How many years did you take? I didn't take any years, you needed chakra, and I provided it. You accepted it, so you have only yourself to blame. Answer my question. He hissed. Oh, very well, the Kyuubi rolled his eyes. Give or take, 90. What? Naruto's disbelief was visible, as he nearly choked on his own salvia. 90 years? No, you're lying to me, you can't have taken 90 years out of me. Uzumaki possess a special chakra, Kurama replied calmly. It is naturally strong and infused with a certain, shall we call it yin-yang component? Well, why else do you think only an Uzumaki can hold me? Because my chakra, by its very nature, it is caustic and deadly, too strong for you mortals to withstand. Only Uzumaki can wield it. Technically one has to wonder why Uzushiagakuer did not demand to keep the Kyuubi as their Jinhiriki, but maybe they did? Who knows? You're lying. Then ignore my words, Kurama replied without a hint of worry. One lie does not negate all the truths I have given you, does it? And if it does, well, what a poor and pitiful man you are going to become if you can't trust someone who saved your life repeatedly. You were taking my lifespan. His right fist hit against the wooden desk. Don't spin what you did around. You would have died without my help, the Kyuubi replied. And as deceased, well, your lifespan would be meaningless in death, right? How long will I live? He finally asked, his voice trembling. Uzumaki are naturally long-lived, the Kyuubi snorted. Your whore of an ancestor survived more than 120 years, you'll probably reach your 30s, that is, if you stop using my chakra completely. It was then that a small smile settled on Kurama's face, at least from what Naruto could imagine. But hear the fox sing-sung, guess what your father did? Naruto's body soon racked itself in pain, as he clutched at his chest. Exactly, the fox whispered with glee. He did not close the seal completely, Kurama chuckled. He wanted my chakra to flow in you, he wanted my power to be at your disposal, and he wanted you to take my chakra for yourself, but guess what? You are weak. You don't have what it takes to control my power. You're nothing more than a mere fragment of my hatred. Shut up, Naruto snarled. He felt like he was pushing away with his head a mass of thick and heavy gel from his own body. He could feel his head pulse from the migraine that was settling in as his hands were digging with their nails on his palms. Shut up, he murmured once more. I'm not listening to you. Very well, the Kyuubi said as the pain subsided abruptly. You have failed me the last time, Naruto, the fox remarked. Henceforth, save yourself, your teammates, your friends, save them alone. Naruto coughed next, exhaling and shuddering slowly. He weakly stood up and moved to the kitchen, to open the fridge and get something to drink to wash away the foul taste of something that made his throat parched up. He drank half a bottle of milk before he headed to take his shower, letting the warm water soak his bones and thoroughly wash his body from the dirt. Once he was clean, he settled the small frog cap on his hair and went to sleep on the sofa without even opening it to get the bed ready. Hastily, he grabbed a bed sheet from the drawer and wrapped it around himself as he did when he was little. If he hid beneath the blankets, the bad men wouldn't be able to find him, and if he remained still and motionless, they wouldn't come in from the window and scare him. How could he drape a blanket over his own skin, however? How could he hide from something that was beneath the blankets, rather than above them? He didn't know when he fell asleep. He just knew that when he woke up, there was a pair of striking green eyes staring at him from the side of the sofa, and the soft smell of his shampoo coming from the owner of said eyes' pink hair. Sakura looked slightly affronted, more like pissed as she held her eyes slightly narrowed on him. "You left again," she accused. "I didn't," he replied. "You weren't there," she said firmly. "I was in the next room," he defended himself. "We are not sleeping together," he added then. "Tigers do sleep together all the time in their burrow," Sakura replied as if it was common knowledge. "This is your burrow, right?" "It's a house, assigned by the Hokage," he replied as he tried to stand up, only for both of Sakura's hands to push him down as she placed them on his chest. "Hey! No, you are not leaving again," Sakura said sternly. "Sensei said we had to talk." She slowly moved herself above him, putting her knees against his stomach rather than just straddling him, for which he actually was thankful. "So we talk." "About what?" he weakly asked. "You scare me," she said, "not with the exam, not with the Kyuubi, not with what you do, but when you leave and look at me with those eyes of yours." Her right hand went up, to grab a lock of his raven hair whose root was already blonde again. "Those sad eyes of yours," she whispered. "I can't stand that," she said then. "And you leave, you always leave, without telling anyone," she added. "You have to tell us where you go, Naruto." "I was scared because you didn't tell me." "Sakura, are you alright?" he finally asked, because right there and then she didn't look at all sane. "I'm fine," she huffed as she slowly stretched like a cat, her hands holding onto his shoulders as she did so. She smiled then and growled playfully, before moving her teeth down to bite Naruto on the neck. "Hey!" he exclaimed, pushing her away. Sakura actually laughed at that, standing crouched and with a playful attitude on her face as she looked at him with a wicked grin. "No biting." "Why not?" she asked back, puzzled. "Do we have to go somewhere today?" "No, but..." "Let's play then," she exclaimed happily, tackling him and making him fall on the ground. She rolled with him on the floor for a while, painfully aware that her laughter sounded distorted and weak compared to her normal voice. Wait. Don't you want breakfast?" Sakura stopped, her arm still circling around Naruto's neck as she was standing halfway on his back and with her left knee on the floor as if she was trying to climb on his back once more. "All right," she said with a nod and a beaming smile as she quickly stood up, before beginning to look around the kitchen for the plates and the kitchenware. Naruto exhaled out in relief and wiped away the sweat on his forehead. Just what was going on with Sakura? She looked playfully like a cat, to say the least. Was this a consequence of her training? His mood darkened considerably the next moment. He had sworn he would find who had done this to her, hadn't he? And once he did, he would make that person pay. He began breakfast by chopping the vegetables and placing the oil to fry the rice, while he skillfully began to clean the fish. He actually swatted away with the back of a wooden spoon Sakura's hand, which had been creeping towards the still raw fish with a hungry gaze on her. The fact he was imagining her with cat ears and a cat's tail wasn't actually helping his concentration, but he did manage to prepare a decent breakfast. "Sakura!" he exclaimed in mock desperation. "What's gotten into you?" Sakura stilled for a moment wide-eyed, before she slowly slumped her shoulders and sat down at the table. Now she was brooding, which was perfect because Naruto now understood even less what was going on. "Tigers play with one another," she weakly whispered, badly hiding her sniffling. "It shows friendship." "We aren't tigers," Naruto replied, feeling horrible. We're shinobi. We banter with one another, like, me and Sai, or we talk about the weather and random things, or we plan contingencies for bad stuff that might happen, you know, that's what we do. Yeah, you're right, Naruto, she wistfully murmured. That's what we do, right? Yes, he nodded. Now, do you feel better? Yes. She nodded firmly. Let's eat. Naruto sighed and began to eat, his eyes every now and then gazing to the door and then to the window as he did so. You left some scrolls open in the office, Sakura suddenly said from the other side of the table. Those words froze Naruto on the spot. I rolled them up and placed them on the shelf, she added then as an afterthought. Really, how disorganized can you be? Ah, I'm sorry. She huffed, showing her displeasure. And even with cooking, what is this? It's slightly charred. Wait, what was she being nitpicky with food to begin with? And the vegetables are cut in wrong chunks, she murmured once more. Naruto raised an eyebrow. There had to be a reason for her suddenly finding everything wrong with the food. It's decided, Sakura nodded to herself. You can't cook, so you'd better learn it since it's a good to have shinobi skill, she hesitantly glanced to the side. They teach cooking in kunoichi classes, so I know how to cook, I'll teach you. Was there a blush now? My house is bigger than this apartment and the fridge is full. So, as repayment for breakfast, even if it wasn't great, we can eat lunch there. Naruto just brought his right hand to his face and sighed. He deeply exhaled the air he was holding in his lungs, before finally just nodding and giving in. All right. Sakura croaked out before actually fist-pumping in the air her success. We can invite Sai too, and then we can train on the techniques. I memorized the scrolls anyway. Naruto blinked. You what? I memorized the scrolls, she repeated slowly. I always passed my exams because I'm good at memorizing stuff. I see. Even yours, Naruto, she rolled her eyes. But you barely skimped through it. She gave him a simple look, before smiling brightly. Of course not, I was reading it as you read it the first time, she smiled sweetly. You weren't even bothering to look around you, so I peeked at it. Naruto groaned. Really? Yep. The raven-haired boy shook his head. Really? They began to laugh after that, and truly, that was such a wonderful moment. A pity it would not last forever. 2 days afterwards, their team was standing at attention in front of Jiraiya of the Sunin. He had returned from his scouting missions, and after having reported to the Hokage had immediately rounded them up. Very well, he said calmly. Do you know the elemental technique I asked you to learn? The 3 Chunin nodded as one, as Naruto stepped forward to demonstrate first. It won't be needed, Jiraiya raised his hand to stop him. We will be moving at a forced march at least until we reach the land of rice fields. He turned to give a cold and calculative gaze to the rest of the team. Whatever happens, we must strive to avoid detection from the moment we step outside the village. You will not bring aid to people in need, you will not reveal yourself, and you will not, under any circumstance, break out of the shadows offered by the trees. Understood? Yes, Teiko, Yojao said first, standing firmly to attention. Very well, Jiraiya nodded. Now, he turned to leave. Follow me. The 3 Chunin and their sensei did just that, following the Sunin as they left Konoha and took to the treetops, the shadows keeping them hidden as they moved. They were on a mission after all, their first B-rank mission. Meanwhile, Sasuke was sitting still with his back against the walls of his house. The house he had shared with his parents and his brother. The house, which now was devoid of life. There was a crash. Well, devoid of Uchiha life. The Chunin assigned to make sure he would survive in his blindness was Hana and Yazuka. Apparently, since they relied on their noses and other senses, blindness was not much of a problem for the dog users of Konoha. It was that or the Abarame, and he clearly did not want insects crawling around. He wouldn't stop scratching his skin. There had been some talk about the dogs would help with pet therapy, but he had no idea what type of therapy an ugly mutt could provide. Really, he was doing this because he had no other choice. Uchiha. The girl had the same gallivanting tone as her brother, if not even fiercer and far more annoying. Where's the food in here? Third cupboard, he drawled out from his spot. He felt a wet nuzzle against his thigh, before the panting of a dog reached his ears. Perfect, one of the dogs of the Inyazuka was now asking him to pet his head. He refused. He wasn't going to pet any dog's head, no matter what was the dog actually pushing his head against his hand. That didn't count as petting. Inyazuka, he said dryly. Can you take your mutt away from me? He's annoying. There was the sound of a hurt dog, one of those whimpers the beasts did when wounded or crying. Their consistent whining was something he didn't like at all. Oh, come on Uchiha. Just pet him. You won't lose your hand and you know, it might make you less of a stick in the mud. No, he said gritting his teeth. I won't. The whining was there again. The problem with the dog or dogs, since he could swear there was more than one gallivanting around, was that he was a ninja dog. He could dodge, and since Sasuke was blind, well, there was no way he could actually hit him. Then he'll keep on trying. Come on boy, don't sulk, I know he's a frowning little asshole, but hey, we can always train him with the squirt bottle. Why don't you do so then? Sasuke snapped angrily. I was talking with the dog, Uchiha. Not everything revolves around you, you know. Sasuke just frowned. He would have glared at the Inyazuka but, he didn't have his eyes to do so. You know what pisses me off? Hana suddenly said. It's the way you lost your eyes. Really, how stupid do you have to be to believe in a stranger offering you power like that for no reason? How much of an imbecile do you have to be to say yes? I would have gone to the Hokage. I would have questioned the Churyunin. You didn't even ask your sensei. Just where is your loyalty to Konoha, Where are the bonds with your teammates? You're with Kiba, he wouldn't have been that stupid either and he is stupid. There was a moment of silence. He is certified stupid, actually. I think the only reason he passed the exams was because me and Mom drilled him. Mom and I, Sasuke sourly interrupted. Yeah, whatever. Anyway. That was stupid. Stupid and, well, the Hokage could have left you alone you know. He didn't and he asked my mom for help. We could have said no, and you know there are days where I can't help but watch you and expect some change. Anything different from the usual, I'm pissed, I'm sour, please shut up and let me die in a corner, would be nice. How would you feel if? I'd feel angry, for the first years, she snapped back. I'd probably swear revenge. I would not accept a closed box offer from someone I don't know concerning a power I know not how it works. There's a difference between planning for revenge and burning oneself up. And the latter case usually leads to death, not to avenging. Tisk. You'll never know what I feel. No, you're right, Hana sighed. It doesn't mean I can't try and understand it. Look kid, she said then. You're still young. You have your life ahead of you. Find something else you like to do. You're an Uchiha, you're filthy rich and do it. I'm here as your overglorified suicide guard and medical assistant. I offered to teach you how to move without eyes and you shot me down. I ain't asking you again, you want to learn, now I want you to beg me for it. Never, he snarled. I didn't ask for you. No, but there are still people who care about people like you, the Sandaime takes cares even if you don't want him to. Your sensei comes by daily to ask me how you are, and yet you just stay there and sulk. You don't even drink the water in the cup. Your dog laps it. Because you leave it on the ground. Not my fault, there weren't dogs here when I still had my eyes. Oh, for the love of Kami, you're insufferable, but no, I'm not leaving you. Eventually you will have to, he shot back. The Hokage's charity will end soon. Ah, you'll be surprised just what being an Uchiha means in Konoha, you're like, nobility. There are people who are already donating to the Keep Alive the Last Uchiha bank account. The medics hope to find a cure to your sterility and get you on a nice, produce Uchiha mode. You'll then live the rest of your life as a reproduction horse, but hey, considering you're a dick then I suppose it's fitting. Shut up. He snarled in her direction, or what he hoped was the right direction. Why? Because I'm not kissing your ass? You're an hypocrite. You rebuke those who venerate you as fangirls and you ignore those who try to help you without venerating the ground you walk on. You're a little ball of anger and frankly, you're not cute at all. I don't know what those girls of your fan club see in you, but really, you're ugly as hell. Shut up. Nope, Hannah's voice now filled with a teasing tone. And you can't make me, because you can't even find me. You aren't even thinking this through properly. You could learn and then force me to remain quiet, but you don't, because of course you aren't even able to swallow your pride. What is it, too big for you to handle? Sasuke clenched his fists, his entire body shuddering in rage as he tried to breathe slowly. He couldn't let the girl win. He had to show her that the Uchiha were not weak. That he was worth 10 times an Inyazuka. I can swallow my pride when I want to. Yeah? Prove it. He licked his lips hesitantly. I would like to learn. Huh? Can't hear you. Teach me, he ground his teeth. Please, teach me. Still can't hear you. There's this buzzing noise. Please teach me how to live without eyes. He finally snapped out. You could work on your presentation, Hannah chuckled. He could feel her move closer, even if he had no idea from which side. Suddenly, his hair felt ruffled from behind him. But for a first time swallowing your pride? It's passable. Now, the first thing you need to know. As Hana and Yazuka began instructing Sasuke Uchiha, elsewhere a red-haired girl sighed and looked to the sky. Why me? Karen whispered, standing in front of one of Orochimaru-sama's security prisons. Well, orders are orders. And with those words she marched inside. To free all the lab rats, and let them go throughout the land of rice to ravage and destroy it. For what purpose, she had no idea. But Orochimaru-sama's will was there to be followed, because he knew what had to be done, and disobeying him, well, nobody was that stupid. She wondered if she'd ever see Naruto again though, he had been a brief moment of fun in her life even if she had poisoned his teammates afterwards. And so she wondered about life and death, and rotten experiments especially, as she opened the cages and left. The monsters were free to roam now. She had freed them all. Chapter 35, The Prowling Pace of Darkness. The plains and the forest of Konoha were a beautiful verdant color as the 5 shinobi dashed across the treetops and the wooden branches that were the highway all ninja used to move unseen by the general population. At the head of the formation, the white-haired Jiraiya of the 3 Sannin looked every now and then back to his team, especially Naruto. The boy was worried. He was showing all the signs of someone half expecting something bad to happen immediately, and that didn't bode well to him. He had been there hidden but still there when the brat had fought in the arena. Actually, the Umbu had believed him hiding to be the problem. They had run like chickens trying to actually find where he was. Brat! Jiraiya exclaimed, earning himself the attention of the twin cerulean orbs that so much reminded him of his former student, and also, well, a growl from the pink-haired girl who seemed keen on taking every word he said as either an insult or an attempt at corrupting her teammates. Yes, Jiraiya-sama. Ever had the need to scream Databane? The sudden question stumped Naruto, whose eyes widened briefly at the word before settling back to their normal pensive glaze. No. Jiraiya mused, you're definitively like your father then. You even have the same eyes when you think about something moody. Planning to confess and be rejected. No, Naruto exhaled, shaking his head and twisting his body halfway in midair to avoid a treacherous branch. I'm not. Dickless has a harem, Sai quipped in. He doesn't need to confess, he has the Dickless magnetism to help him get the girls on him. Dickless magnetism? Jiraiya asked, perplexed. Nah, it's the eyes and the hair. Well, in his case not the hair. He has beautiful eyes, Sai nodded back. There was a heartbeat of silence. I never said that, the pale-skinned boy said then. Understood. Pervert, Sakura scoffed. Extreme pervert. Yes, cherry, kinky cherry. So what, I'm Lord, harem lord. Naruto asked, stifling a chuckle. Well then I'm super pervert, Jiraiya said. Yojao Izuki remained quiet for a moment. She knew this was like the usual banter between Umbu to ensure the proper bonding of the teammates for the mission. She had to remember these weren't genin anymore, but shinobi. She had to act like that, and thus. I'm Cat, Purple Cat. So we're the team pervert cherry, Lord Supercat? Naruto asked befuddled. Lord Supercat is a pervert cherry, Sakura quipped back. Lord Super Pervert loves the cat's cherry, Sai said in monotone. There was another moment of silence. Jiraiya began to giggle madly. The inspiration. Jiraiya-sama, Yojao Izuki said calmly. Don't. The white-haired Sunin pouted. Mentally, he began thinking about Zojao Suzuki, the Nico girl who loved her master's brushes. He's having lewd thoughts, Sakura said firmly. Can I castrate him? Sakura, no, Sai said. There are 50 methods to torture someone with a dick. There are only 44 without. I don't even want to know how you know that, Sakura replied without missing a beat. But you know? I want to learn them. Well, since you're asking, Sai remarked. The first method requires barbed wire and silence. Jiraiya's sudden exclamation cut Sai short, as the 5 shinobi stilled atop a tree. Beneath them, near the road, a group of 4 strange misshapen humans were currently beating down a merchant, while a woman was screaming as a 5th of those monsters was tearing through her clothes. Send a message to the local patrol, Jiraiya whispered to Sai. They're 2 miles east from here. Tell them, red 5, orange 2, ... The boy complied, uncaring of the strange code delivered that he had to send. An ink eagle soon flew towards east, as Jiraiya nodded to himself. We march on. The screams of the woman continued even as they left her behind. Couldn't we? Sakura's meek voice was met with a firm reply from Jiraiya. No. But we have our mission parameters. They are. And it doesn't matter. Our mission is more important, and if they belonged to Otagakure and one of them survived and went back, it would have destroyed our secrecy. They are going to rape that woman. Sakura seethed. And we are going to stand by and do nothing. Sakura, Yojao spoke firmly. We have our mission. But. Sakura, Naruto whispered then. The patrol will arrive in time, but we can't risk failing this mission. There's a war going on, we can't hesitate. The shinobi who cannot school his heart will die, Jiraiya quipped. Personally? I think it's bullshit, but when a mission is important, I can see the importance of it. It's not, fine, Sakura murmured back. I just hope my parents made it back alive. They'll be fine, Naruto remarked. They'll be. They're dead, the Kyuubi said calmly. I'm not listening to you, he retorted angrily to the fox. They're dead, the Nine-Tails fox deadpanned. Why don't you tell her that? You are lying and this conversation is over, Naruto hissed through his teeth. He missed a branch from the fox's distraction, ending up having to use his arms to hold onto a lower branch and use the momentum to swing himself back on top. Try and avoid falling, Naruto, Jiraiya chided him. If someone saw you, we'd have to silence him. Sorry, he replied. The rest of the trip went by in silence, as they barely stopped to catch their breath for 5 minutes before starting to run once more. They were forcefully marching miles and miles without repose, so much that by the end of the 3rd day, the 3 Chiryunin were covered in dirt and leaves, and smelled like resin. I think Sakura's about to drop, Yojao said standing to the side of Jiraiya. They went on for 3 days with little rest. The average for Jounin is 2 weeks, Jiraiya replied. They can hold for another day. Jiraiya-sama, Yojao murmured. Is there something in the mission scroll I was not told? Affirmative, the white-haired Sunin said. But you don't have the clearance for it. I have Umbu clearance, Jiraiya-sama, Yojao replied. So it has to be an S-rank secret. Precisely, Cat-chan, he giggled as a slight dribble of blood fell from his nose. Oh you naughty cat, he giggled again. Yojao raised an eyebrow, was he daydreaming while running? No, he was probably trying to avert the conversation from going further. She slowed down slightly, letting him pass her by as she reached her team. Sakura was sweating, her hair stuck to her face and her body trembling from the effort to jump. Sakura? You should take a soldier pill, Yojao remarked. I can do, sensei, Sakura ground out through her teeth. I can do. Being stubborn is not a sign of a good ninja. I'm your sensei and this is an order from a superior on the field, take a pill. Sakura looked about to retort, but she didn't speak. She just nodded abruptly and hissed as she grabbed one from her Chiryunin vest, before biting it down. She stopped trembling a moment later, but her face betrayed what she really was thinking about it all. Sakura, Yojeo exhaled. You are not weak because you took a pill first, she replied. Naruto has the Kyuubi, and his stamina is off the chart. He could run around for 5 days when he was a kid without sleeping, and I know because I was sometimes assigned to keeping an eye out on him. Sakura didn't speak. And Sai's got his own reasons. He's been trained since birth. If you had been in any other group of your peers, you would have been the last to take one. It's just the circumstances. Don't take it to heart, understood? Yes, sensei. Good, then the purple-haired woman sped up to stand between Jiraiya and her team. Sakura closed her eyes for a moment, before taking a deep breath and slapping both of her cheeks with her hands. She could do this. Talking with Yojeo-sensei had made her remember something, and now was better than never. Naruto. She whispered. Can I ask you a question? Naruto flinched slightly, as if there was something he was afraid of in Sakura's voice. Yeah. Why did you change? Naruto was puzzled. He brought up his right eyebrow as he looked at his teammate, not understanding at all the question. You were happy once, she said then. You jumped, you made the class laugh, you changed then. Why? That's... He exhaled. Can we speak about this later? Will you answer me? She said then. You won't run away, right? I promise, Naruto nodded. I won't run away. She returned to look ahead, and Naruto's spirit just dropped. The Kyuubi had to be lying. There was no way Sakura's parents were dead. How could he know? He was the source of malice, not of dead people. But maybe he had felt the malice from the brigands who had attacked her family? Maybe, he swallowed nervously. He had kept quiet until then, he would keep it up. There was no reason to make Sakura suffer so early, and with 6 months or more of mission time, she would be more stable further down the road. They finally camped in the nook of wide enough trees to hide them with their thick canopies, just before the forest began to grow thin and leave the place to rice fields. We pause for 4 hours, and then we proceed once more. Jiraiya said firmly. Scatter and scavenge. Those words said, the 3 Chiryunin acted like one as they dashed beneath the tree, looking around for edible stuff to eat. Sakura was actually the first to return with food, a dead bird that had been consequently flash-cooked, a handful of mushrooms and a mouthful of herbs. Sai was next, with a fish and half a dozen of eggs from some nearby bird nests. Naruto returned last, after an hour had already passed, with half of a deer. How? Sakura asked, both of her eyebrows rising to the edges of her forehead. I kind of killed it and ended up with the bits scattered around, Naruto sheepishly murmured. Had to destroy the evidence, that's why I wasted time. Less chatting, more eating, Sai quipped. Need it cooked. There was a nod, a burst of fire, and Naruto shared cooked deer afterwards. The 5 minutes it took to eat it were spent in silence, and just as the raven-haired boy was already glad Sakura had dropped the issue, he found himself staring into a pair of extremely close emerald eyes. Well? Sakura asked. She didn't shyly ask or hesitantly ask or whatever ask. She just asked. Well? Naruto coughed slightly to the side, letting his back rest against the tree trunk. Sakura was crouched in front of him, her eyes seemingly transfixed on his form. Well, what? No running, she quipped. No running. She stressed out through gritted teeth. All right, he exhaled. It's a long story. Sakura nodded, swinging her legs to the side of the branch and sitting down, letting them dangle in midair. I'm an orphan, Sakura nodded. So as an orphan, it's not like you can do much, right? Sure, you can play in the garden of the orphanage, but until school starts, you're pretty much on yourself. They tell you that you shouldn't leave the garden during the day, but, well, nobody actually played around the garden. The older kids bullied the young ones, because the young ones have a chance of getting adopted while the old ones don't. Some of the old ones are also unable to use chakra, and so they're civilians and have to live in the orphanage until they're old enough to find a job. He exhaled. Sometimes, a few shinobi would come. We called them masks. They came, they took a few of the really young kids, and then we no longer heard from them. I was terrified of the masks. Everyone kind of was, but you know, it's not like you can do something about it, right? You're a kid and if they tell you that they've been adopted, you're actually jealous about them, but I wasn't. I was afraid they'd come for me next. Naruto swallowed heavily. So I did what I could to avoid the masks when they came. I found a hole in the garden's fence, and I crawled through it. That's how I first began exploring Konoha. I was a kid back then, and I was actually more excited than scared. I lost myself after a few minutes of walking around. He chuckled nervously. I was so scared. The people passed by and looked at me for a while, then frowned in disgust and moved on. I was told not to speak with strangers, but I just was afraid, you know? I didn't like the orphanage, but that was the place where at least I knew someone. His voice was soft now. I began crying at a corner. You'd expect someone would have stopped to console the crying kid, but nobody did. It was a busy street. I didn't have the Umbu watching me like a hawk back then, and I think the Sandaime was still busy repairing the damage the Kyuubi did to the village or whatnot. I cried myself to exhaustion, but his voice trailed off. Nobody came. I think that's when I decided to wear some bright color. There was this kid who was wearing orange, and he was holding his parents' hands, and so I just thought, maybe if I wear orange, they'll see me too. I didn't think I was without parents, I just thought they had gone somewhere. He shook his head. A kid doesn't know the meaning of death until later, so. He softly whispered. That's when I became hungry. I couldn't stay there, so I began to walk. I tried to get back to the orphanage, but I just ended up in the opposite direction. It was getting pretty late at night, and I was hungry, so I thought, since the orphanage cooks at night, if I follow my nose looking for food I'll find them. I'm sorry if it's long-winded, but it's all right, Sakura murmured back softly. Take your time, Naruto. All right, he exhaled. And that's how I found out about Ichiraku ramen. I just ended up near it. I was dirty, exhausted and famished. It was Ayame who found me outside. She said I looked like some sort of wounded rabbit with big wide and puffy eyes, and believing her I was simply too adorable to leave outside in the cold. He chuckled. How I wished she hadn't found me. He clenched his fists tightly then, his eyes watery. I would give anything to just go back and tell that past me to just go away. They didn't deserve what they got in the end, he exhaled. They didn't deserve me. He closed his eyes, bringing his knees closer to himself as his right arm firmly encircled them. Ichiraku's ramen was a stand, and yet it became my second home. I didn't have much money, it's not like the orphanage gives out money like candy, but I did what I could to earn it. The food was warm and at least they saw me. They could see me, whether I was wearing orange or not, they saw me. It was enough. He opened his eyes again. I thought that maybe, if I kept on smiling and acting kindly, then people would eventually open up. I didn't know I had the Kyuubi in me. I didn't know people weren't actually hating me, but what I had inside, I didn't know, and nobody would tell me. He exhaled. Years passed. I started the academy. The children kept their distance at first, but at least the sensei couldn't ignore me. I was finally called Naruto rather than demon or monster. It was nice, even if Iruka-sensei had a wicked chalk throw. He chuckled sadly. And then that night came. He breathed in slowly. I wanted to cover in paint an angry merchant of the market square. I had found a nice canister of paint a few days before and it was half empty. So I grabbed some rope and began to work on it. I would knock on the door, the kin would fall and he'd be covered, you know? I couldn't even start on it. His voice became low, so low that Sakura had to strain her hearing to hear him. I just had the kin of paint in hand, when Toka-san came from around the corner and saw me. He immediately zeroed on me and asked what I was doing outside so late at night. He was worried about me, and that made me kind of happy. I was answering him when the merchant in question went back home and saw me too. I hadn't even started the prank, but he didn't care. He neared me and, well, he hit me. Then Tokusan intervened. They scuffled, he threw Tokusan back and he fell. Naruto choked out a sob. He fell and he didn't stand up and I saw red. I just know that when I woke up in the hospital, they told me Tokusan had died because he had broken his neck against that canister of paint. The one I had brought because I wanted to play a prank on someone else. His eyes narrowed with their sadness on Sakura, as tears slowly descended down his cheeks. I killed him with my stupidity, he snarled. If only I hadn't been pranking people. If only I had avoided acting like a moron. I could have had a sort of family. I could have been happy. He chuckled to himself. The world is filled with madmen and monsters don't deserve to be happy. Naruto. Sakura whispered softly. He remained silent until he felt a soft weight settling on his knees. He looked up, just to see Sakura's back resting against his legs with her head moved backwards, so as to still keep on looking at him. She had to be uncomfortable in that position. You don't have to be sad now, she whispered. Her arms went backwards, open wide as if she was trying to hug him. He opened his legs, letting her fall back with her head on his stomach as she smiled at that. She quickly recovered herself, pushing with her feet so as to have her head resting against his chest. You have me and Sai. I am not participating in a pity orgy for him, Kinky, Sai suddenly said in monotone, his eyes watching the scene unfold as Naruto stammered out while Sakura went blushing red. If he wants my ass he'll have to fight for it, Sai said. There was a moment of silence. A fight to the death, another second of silence, which means he'd also be a necrophile. Sai blinked. You are not a necrophile, are you, Dickless? No, Naruto sighed. I'm not. One day, I'd like to know how your train of thoughts goes, but I think I'd go mad if I tried to reason with your mind. A bit away from them, Yojao looked towards Jiraiya. And this is why I will not let you take him on an apprenticeship. Understood now, Jiraiya-sama. I'll speak with the old geezer once more, the white-haired Sunin said. How is he even functional to begin with? Luck, I suppose, Yojao murmured softly. The masks are the Umbu trainers. Sometimes they get the recruits directly from the orphanage. I know, Jiraiya exhaled. There were so many orphans after the Kyuubi's attack, and so little shinobi. Yojao's arms crossed over her chest. I was taken that way, she remarked. The training is brutal, needed but brutal. Ma, Jiraiya remarked, taking out his pen and his notepad. In the midst of their tears, Sakura found the strength to love Naruto, and as their lips met in a passionate locked embrace, their tongues darted through each other's mouth too. There now was a katana piercing through his notepad. You will not write smut about my students, Yojao said firmly. She huffed and removed the katana tip, at the same time she tore to shred the notepad. Oh, Nico-chan. Jiraiya whispered back. Are you a Tsunsun? What? A TS, never mind. Quickly, Jiraiya memorized the few lines he had already written. He had the title for his next Ika ready by now, and by the time the mission was over, he'd be sending off to the editor a first draft. The title was pure genius too. Ika Sexy Team Dynamics, Extra Nico Edition, Non. You are dribbling blood from the nose, Jiraiya-sama, Yojao replied coolly. Must I smack the impure thoughts out of your body? She began to unsheath the katana once more. Nope, he quickly shook his head. I'm fine. Purified, pure like a baby really. There was a sigh of contentment from the white-haired Sunin, as Yojao simply sheathed her blade again and then moved to a corner of the nook between the trees to stand guard. Quietly, Jiraiya sat down, keeping an eye on the now half-asleep forms of the three Chiryunin. All three of them were resting now, but not completely asleep. Every 30 minutes, they'd move their eyes a bit to wake up forcefully. It helped to avoid disorientation in case of a sudden assault. Jiraiya grimaced as he remembered Minato. If this was how Konoha had treated Naruto, he was surprised the boy hadn't defected earlier. The Sandaime had been right in fearing for a possible escape attempt. The boy had no love for the people of Konoha, and with the way the tournament had gone, the feeling was mutual. He could attempt to mitigate it, but in the end, He could only do this much, since the rest would be on Naruto's shoulders. The way the three of them slept was cute, however there was a single brown and green speckled blanket covering the three of them, and just like Sai's head was dropped on one of Naruto's shoulder, so too was the girl resting on the other side, half of her body probably laid atop the Raven Boy. If only he had had that much luck with Tsunade. Then again the thought suddenly made him wonder, just what was the woman going to do now that the old man had been thoroughly pissed. Elsewhere, Tsunade was actually trembling and blanching, as she read once more the carefully written pamphlet. They were standing in the room of a hotel, where her credit was still worth something. The Senju compound will be demolished to make way to hot springs and tourist attractions. Tsunade murmured in disbelief. The cemetery will be emptied and the corpses burned to place an extension of the red light district in it. She tore the pamphlet in neat halves. Shizun, she barked to her assistant. We're going back to Konoha. Tsunade Shishao, Dan's niece said with hesitation. It might be a trap, the third Hokage. Sensei knows I know this is probably the only thing that would get me back in Konoha, she sighed. But what is he going to do? I'll go back, stomp him a bit around and get him to stop. Heck, I'll probably saddle him with a few of my debts to boot knowing him. She rolled her honey brown eyes. After all, he probably just wants to know if I actually met with Orochimaru or not. Shizun swallowed nervously. But, Shishao, we did meet with him. Yes, Tsunade nodded. But Sensei doesn't know that for sure. Just let me do the talking, understood? If you say so, Tsunade Shishao, Shizun sighed. I'll come along. Very well. And look, you said you wanted to visit Konoha, right? Well, you'll get your wish now. Shizun sighed. Yes, Shishao, I suppose I will. In a Megakur, meanwhile, the body of Hanzo spoke to the root envoy that Danzo himself had sent. The root-trained soldier had no idea that he wasn't actually talking to the leader of AIM, but to his corpse held together by chakra and techniques too dark to speak of. Danzo-sama, the root Umbu began calmly, would like to offer his help in fighting the shinobi of Orochimaru, and the help of his elite men, in memory of the past deals between Root and your leadership. I see, Hanzo nodded, standing up from his metallic throne that stood surrounded by pipes and metal sheets, the windows of the meeting hall covered by scraps of metal and bars as if to resemble a prison cell. There were no carpets, and only the cold sound of metal beating metal was hearable softly, and that too was overpowered by the ever-falling rain that pattered on the ground. I wonder, the salamander summoner remarked. If you suddenly had the power to make right any wrongdoings. The root Umbu tensed slightly. Hanzo-sama. Would you use said power for revenge, or for forgiveness? Hanzo exhaled then slowly. I know what I would do with it, but I am curious, Faceless Nin. What would you do with such power? The root shinobi seemed to be struggling with himself, before he finally answered. I would use the power in the name of Danzo-sama. I see, Hanzo hissed out. I see, he exhaled once more. The Umbu never saw the metallic blade tear through his own chest. He just felt the blood in his mouth, as the poison quickly began to work, devouring his insides, tearing apart his muscles and making his fleshy corpse devoid of any inner organ or bones now flop down on the ground. He won't be missed, Sasori of the Red Sand commented, his boyish appearance hiding his true puppet self. I'll put his body to good use. Another wooden arm emerged from beneath his cloak, as he firmly grasped at the now boneless body of the root with his chakra thread. The new poison works perfectly too. A Megakur, Hanzo remarked. Has been the site of battles too bloody to be remembered, and too bloody to be forgotten, his voice cracked. I will not have battle come to AIM. Yeah, Sasori rolled its eyes. What should I tell Orochimaru? Tell him to begin, Hanzo's corpse replied. Tell him, to go south. South. Sasori replied. Suna has something. No, the corpse replied. Further south still. Well, if you say so, the puppet master commented. It will be an easy thing then, do I really have to bring the Moron with me? The Moron will be useful, Hanzo replied. In more ways than one. Fine, Sasori nodded. But did Orochimaru get what I needed? He did, Hanzo ground out. Now, will you go? Fine, and with those words, the wooden puppet that was Sasori disappeared in a flicker, together with the corpse of the root Umbu. Nagato exhaled as he walked out of the shadows, the Rinnegan shining in his eyes. He watched with amusement as Hanzo descended from the throne, and smiled as he simply dropped limp on the ground next to it. Calmly, he took his place on the spot and closed his eyes. His chakra flew. It flew in the night sky, it flew through the realm of the living and the dead. It flew beyond things mortal men could understand and beyond the great wheels that spun through the ether. It flew, and then it landed in the body of his choice. The eyes of the man in question opened without a fault, as he moved his hands to swipe away the bed sheets and stand up, to dress and prepare for another day of work. The body was rested, his mind was not. And so he walked out to watch the sun rise over the sea, of that perfectly clear morning that made him smile. It was such beautiful scenery. "Boss," the croaking voice of the man's bodyguards reached his ears, as he turned and looked at them through his dark sunglasses. "We've convinced the villagers to leave," one of the two katana wielders grumbled. "The bridge is ours now, Chief." Gata nodded. It was ironic that after the first bridge builder died, his grandson had taken up the duty of completing it. Unfortunately for them, Gata had become his afterwards. He had let them build the bridge. He had waited until they had completed it, and then he had crushed their pathetic existence to claim it with Gata's money, power, and men. Ants had no power over a god. And he was a god. An almighty god, and soon he would have a body worthy of being called godlike. Then he would have peace. Through pain, he would bring forth peace. Naruto felt a shiver run across his body, as he opened his eyes to find Jiraiya snapping his fingers in front of him. "Wake up, kid, we have to go." He nodded. Standing up, he looked around the makeshift camp they had built beneath the ground, halfway on the road towards what was supposed to be the location of Orochimaru's main hideout. There had been some close calls, during the days spent walking on the road or crawling in the knee-deep water of the rice fields. Once, Sai had come close to losing his head when a farmer had begun working on his field with his scythe. Thankfully he had been distracted by the boy's genjutsu. Sakura seemed a natural in prowling and hiding through the vegetation. She took to wearing face paint of a green and white color since rice was white and the stalks were green, and she actually growled when she felt something come closer. The murmurs on killing Anko just seemed to grow from his sensei's side every time that happened. Well, at least he now had a name for the bastard he had to kill for making Sakura like that. He grumbly ate the small ration mixed with cooked stolen rice. No farmer was going to miss a few grains of rice, they had thousands. The sun was half covered by clouds, making the sky a giant sort of annoying mirror that glinted light in his eyes. He kept his gaze to the ground, as he settled the dirty-looking mantle on his back and placed the thick straw hat on his head. The farmer who had used those things was long dead, his body swiftly killed by Sakura ripping out the man's neck from behind. He had balked at the scene once. The second time she had done that, he had just offered a piece of cloth to the girl to clean her mouth. He actually looked like a farmer, while Jiraiya seemed like the grumpy drunken father with a bag on his back. Sai could not pass off as a farmer to save his life, that much had been clear simply by the color of his skin, not tanned enough, and his muscles weren't as burly to give him that appearance. His fingers too delicate also added to it. Sakura and Sensei were out too, since farmers' wives remained at home, they didn't travel with their husbands. So it was that, since the trees had grew too sparse, Naruto and Jiraiya had begun walking along the road in plain view, and trusting their safety to Sai, who wasn't actually pissed at having to keep on crawling in the water, Sakura, who seemed to be more at ease in those days than ever before, and Yojao, who actually was strangely beginning to reminisce with fondness her Umbu training. Movement ahead, Yojao radioed from her position as the forward scout. Naruto did his best not to tense, as he watched a figure with orange hair dash forward too fast to be civilian, so it had to be a ninja. The girl in question had a dark blue hat on her head, and the moment she stopped in front of them, she narrowed her light eyes on both of their figures. Jiraiya's hair was actually black now, and seemed buzz-cut. Apparently, the Toad Sage knew fully well the trick of misdirection, and he had a far firmer grasp on the henge than Naruto could ever possess. "You too," the girl seemed to growl out. "What are you doing here?" "Heading to the capital, to plead to the daimyo." Jiraiya's voice came out drunken and half lecherous, something he was quite proficient in doing. He must do something. Those monsters, those horrible monsters. From which area do you come from? The girl replied with a worried voice. Are there any survivors of your village? That rubbed Naruto wrong. There had been no identify yourself, just some sort of set acceptance. No, Jiraiya didn't miss a beat as he shook his head sadly. He grasped Naruto by the shoulder, pulling him close to his chest. Me and my boy, we survived by running. We were out late and then, it all burned up. I wanted to save my precious wife but hey, she was a nagging bitch all day long. He sniffled. My Moya, he began to wail. All right, the Kunoichi sighed. Listen, the village of Otagakure is just a few hours of walk that way. She pointed to the side of the road, towards a canopy of trees that actually grew on the side of a hill. When you go there, tell the guards Sasami Fuma vouches for you, alright. She looked to Naruto then. Be quick and get there before the night comes. If you can't, then try to hide by digging a hole. There are things that go around at night and, they're not pretty. Thank you. Thank you. Jiraiya said with teary eyes. Ah, if only my poor Moya. Yeah, Sasami nodded hesitantly. Her gaze went to Naruto once more. Try and keep your father away from the sake in the village, understood? I'll do that ma'am, he replied, nodding, and bashfully lowering his gaze. The girl smiled. I'm Sasami. Sigh, Naruto replied. My drunken pops is Nato. Nato. She raised an eyebrow. Oh well, she shrugged, before starting to run along the road once more. Hope he can hold a weapon. She whispered, but to Naruto's keen ears it was as if she had spoken right next to him. Jiraiya's eyes remained glazed over and sort of drunken for a while, before they finally returned to their normal brilliance a moment later. Something's off. The bitch was in heat, Sakura radioed frostily. The way she looked at Naruto, of course there was something off. No banter on the radio. Yojo's voice came. Use only code words. Bitch whore orange tried pass on Lord, Sakura ground out again. Better, cat. Yes, Yojo sighed. Radio silence unless Fubar, Cherry, Jiraiya said crisply. Heading in with Lord, alone. But. Cherry, pervert said then. Quiet. And then there was silence. But the grounding noise and the clenching and dist ending of Sakura's hands clearly hinted what the girl thought of such an order, even as hidden as she was in the rice fields. Naruto just exhaled. They were entering the lair of the beast. And already, some things were off. What else could go worse? He cursed himself a moment later. He had just jinxed it, hadn't he? Check the description for the links to the author.